Well, good morning. I'm Kerry Benninghoff. I am the House Republican Policy Chairman. We are very, very appreciative of the township here allowing us to use your building, and more Policy Committee has the luxury of learning about a lot of different issues, and it's important for us, and you'll hear very shortly that we have members from all over the state here, which is very helpful. And these men and women do a good job, come back and help formulate policies and help to appropriate the funds that you pay in your tax dollars and to help solve some of these problems. For a couple editorial notes, I just want to remind the members the large microphones are the ones we're using, nor the small ones when you're going to speak, whether testifying or talking up front here. Please make sure the green light's on. For those in the audience, this has been videotaped, so please turn cell phones to vibrate or turn them off completely. And if a member needs to get up and leave, don't take that personal. Sometimes they have other obligations or whatever else, but we will move along. And for our panels, I historically will go down the entire panel and then open up for questions rather than doing it one-on-one. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Jack. But first, if you would, I think, Jack, I'm going to let the members introduce themselves. We'll start from my left and go to the right, and then Jack will give an introductory welcome.
Good morning, Representative Aaron Carver, 120th District, Luzerne County.
Tommy Sankey, Clearfield and Cambria County.
And good morning, friends. Jonathan Fritz, 111th District, comprising Wayne and Susquehanna counties.
Good morning, Senator Scabello, Monroe, Northampton County. I want to thank the chairman for allowing me to participate in this event today. Thank you.
Well, all senators hope to grow up to be a great House member.
That was good, Kerry. Good morning, Rosemary Brown, Monroe and Pike counties.
As I said, I'm Representative Kerry Benninghoff. I'm from the center of the state, home of the Penn State Nittany Lions, and represent parts of Mifflin Center County. Senator Scabello, thank you for being here to support Jack and the rest of the crew up in this area. For those who don't think so, the Senate and the House can work together.
I'm Jack Rader, 176th District, Monroe County.
Hi, good morning. I'm Marcia Hahn, 138th District, Northampton County.
Good morning, Tara Toohill, Luzerne County.
Good morning, Rick Saccone. I represent Southern Allegheny and Northern Washington counties.
And thank you all for coming today. And I want to introduce Marta from Senator Toomey's office also. And you're always involved in issues in our district, and I thank Senator Toomey for sending you. Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, upcoming testifiers and guests. And thank you for Tobiana Township for allowing us to use this facility. I asked the chairman to hold this hearing to look into a pretty straightforward question pertaining to some specific situations. I believe most electrical customers who pay their bills in time each month have a pretty basic expectation. They expect that when they flip their light switch, their lights are going to turn on. I believe, and I think most people would agree, that is a perfectly reasonable expectation. Several times earlier this year, customers' expectations were not met. Did this go out? Can you still hear me? There we go. They spent, in many cases, days without electricity at their homes and businesses. We're here today to hopefully uncover answers to some pretty basic questions. What caused these specific power outages? Why, in many instances, did it take so long to restore power to customers? And what did the utility companies learn from the situation? And how can they use that information to prevent long-term power outages in the future? At the same time, I think most people understand no system is perfect, and there are always going to be unique circumstances. Mother Nature certainly played a role in the power outages we're here to discuss today. And I believe most electric customers realize sometimes a fallen tree will topple over a power line and cause a disruption in service for a short period of time. However, storms obviously are not new or unforeseen threat to a power grid. I think electric customers understand that sometimes the power may go out as a result of a bad storm. However, they deserve an explanation regarding why it took so long in these instances to restore service following the bad weather. Let me be clear about one more point before we begin. We're here today to learn about what happened in these situations, why it took so long to restore power, and what we can do to prevent future similar problems. We are not here today to chastise or reprimand the representatives from the utility companies. we certainly should hold them accountable for their actions and ask difficult questions so that customers receive the answers they deserve. However, simply pointing fingers and blaming people and organizations rarely helps to actually fix a problem. It is understandable that we are angry when the power goes out. It's easy to lose sight of a simple fundamental fact. Utility companies earn money by delivering electricity for us to use. When our electricity isn't working, the utility company starts losing money. It is in the utility company's own self-interest to restore power as soon as possible so it can resume delivering electricity to us and earning money for itself. My focus, and I hope the focus of the committee today, will be on uncovering answers about the past and identifying solutions for the future. Some of the questions I would like to see answered today are, is it feasible to put electric wires underground, particularly in areas where power goes out chronically? Can there be an increase in the trimming or a greater check of the utility lines to take care of problems before they occur? On my road right now, there are 2 dead trees. If they come down, they're going to take the power out. And trees such as these are rarely cut before there is an issue, and increased inspection and maintenance probably would help to solve that problem. When extreme weather is expected, could outside help be called in earlier so that you could get a jump on a bad situation instead of waiting till a problem occurs? Is there any way to make the power grid more efficient so service can be rerouted when lines go down? Do you have the authority now to go off your right-of-way to take care of issues in times of emergency? Does the issue of paying overtime enter into your decisions on how you restore power to customers? Mr. Chairman, thank you again for agreeing to hold this hearing, and I especially want to thank the testifiers who took the time out of their schedules to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Rader. I think that's a tremendous overview, kind of bookends the comments today. Actually, maybe I should just give you the chairman's seat. Not yet. Very well done. Gentlemen, we will start off with our first panel. We are graced with Chris Barrett from Pocono Mountain Visitors Bureau. Thank you very much for being here. Supervisor Chuck Gold from Chestnut Hill Township. Chief Christopher Wagner, Pocono Mountain Regional Police Department. And Mike Wozniewski, with a name like Benninghoff, I try not to butcher others. Mike Wozniewski, Jackson Township Volunteer Fire Company. First of all, thank you all for your service to the community, but second of all, thank you for being here. I don't know which order you want to go in start with, but I would probably defer to the guys with the badges and the guns, but you can do what you want. You want to start? We'll go, Chris, to the left.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. It's always good to go left to the right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning. Good morning, everyone on the committee, Senator. Also, a number of our representatives here from the Pocono Mountains are sitting before us. I'd like to thank them for their support of our industry and everything that you've done, and of course, everyone else, thank you for hearing us. Just a few facts. I want to talk a little bit about what the Pocono Mountains Visitors Bureau is, some of the economic statistics, then very briefly take a look at some long-term and short-term implications of what we just went through, and then maybe offer some suggestions on how we could help as a bureau, because I think we can. First, the history of the Pocono Mountains Visitors Bureau. We've been around for about 75 years as a convention and visitors bureau and a destination marketing organization, representing 2,400 square miles of what we term as the Pocono Mountains. That's actually a 4-county area, so it's Carbon, Monroe, Wayne, and Pike. We're also a membership-based organization. We vary anywhere from about 450 to 700 members, depending upon what year it is. So we're representing a large chunk of the hospitality and tourism interests here within the Pocono Mountains. We host 26.6 million visitors a year, which generate $3.5 billion in economic benefit for the region. The state itself retains a corporation called Tourism Economics to study the effects of tourism in Pennsylvania, and they identified the Pocono Mountains as the fastest growing region in tourism spending in the state. There are 11 regions. The Pocono Mountains was first. So we contributed 9.7% more in spending versus the other 10 regions. This industry in this market also supports the highest percentage of labor income at over 37%. So 37% of the labor income derived in our market is related to hospitality and tourism. That's greater than any other of the the other 10 regions in the state. So just a couple of points. We understand as an industry that there was an extreme amount of difficulty with these events that happened to us, and it's kind of interesting because weather, we're an all-around destination, so we have something to do in every season. A lot of destinations say that, but this is actually a real destination that does it. Our winter weather is incredibly important to us. The last few years have been actually not good. This year was a real strong year in winter weather for us, for all the outside activities. Of course, skiing is the biggest one, but you can just imagine some of the other ones. What we experience with some of these weather events, first I think we have to say, we have to really reach out to the first responders and all the folks that helped our guests first, and then our industry through this need to be really commended. This was an unprecedented event. It strained resources geometrically, and I think our industry really understands that, and we owe all of those folks a really strong thank you for that, because it could have probably been a lot worse. But just to kind of give you the degrees of difficulty that the industry suffered in this process was, we had existing guests that were contained on resort properties when the event happened. So because routes were shut down, those guests couldn't go anywhere. So that meant that we had to extend the stay of the guests that were already there and supply them. Now, some of the resorts didn't have power. They had spoilage of food, which sounds like it's something small, but it really isn't. Also, there were guests that were partially to the resort were able to get to some of our resorts, and I'll name a few that were in this market. For instance, Kalahari, Mount Airy, Camelback. Camelback did have power, some of the other ones didn't. So they had to assist the stranded travelers as just being good community citizens. Mount Airy's, what Mount Airy did was pretty well publicized, and I think they should really be commended, because they went above and beyond to assist the travelers that were stranded. Also, too, they had an inability to accommodate guests who had reservations that were coming in. So it was a perfect storm of horribleness for our resorts. And also staffing and supplies. I kind of mentioned supplies briefly, but staffing, their labor could not get to the resorts to service the guests. So they had people on the property existing that they had to also put up and hope that they would stay in order to service the guests that were on their property. So it was a perfect storm of bad things that could really happen. The good news is that a lot of our properties had contingency plans. They went through this to certain degrees before they were able to handle it, but it was definitely a strain on their operation. So there was a human cost that's really not calculable as far as their staff that had to service the guest. So I want to talk a little bit about short-term and long-term implications. The short-term implications of our course, there were loss of rooms revenue and F&B revenue, food and beverage. There were contracts that were agreed to. There were weddings that were taking place that could not take place. What do you say to a wedding guest? What do you say to a bride and groom? I'm sorry, we can't service your wedding. I mean, that's probably the worst thing you could ever hear in your life. So that was a problem. We had limited service properties, though, believe it or not, that realized increases in their occupancy in their restaurants because of this process, and I'll talk a little bit about that later, especially some of our properties on the 611 corridor. We subscribed to a report called the Smith Travel Report. Actually, some of the occupancies were up because of stranded travelers. Now, the room rates were down because the properties really tried to accommodate them and did not gouge them, which we were happy about, and that helped with some of our occupancy, but obviously it didn't help the situation. Also, hosting of repair crews was extremely positive over that time. We did get some occupancy and F&B related to that. However, guests and staff were unable to get to work. That's probably the worst thing that could ever happen. We had diminished service levels just because staff couldn't get there. That's a problem because it affects the product in the long term. Also, too, some of the properties probably gave up revenue to satisfy the guest that was on property. That's a loss. And, of course, our winter-related activities for people who did not travel into the destination, that was a complete loss of revenue that we'll probably not get back. So those were actually the short term. So let me talk a little bit about the long-term implications. There is an opportunity cost. I mean, how much revenue productivity was actually lost? We could calculate it, but honestly, we'll really never know. It would be a best guess. But there were tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars lost in that period of time. This is another one that's very critical, is the adverse effect on the Pocono Mountains brand from the media coverage. Now, the media had to be involved. The guest had to understand what they were facing if they traveled into the destination. Obviously, some roadways were closed. Overall, in time, that will have an adverse effect on our brand. Also, too, will the guests be very tentative in selecting the Pocono Mountains as a destination in the future because of this situation? The answer to that is probably yes. There's some folks that really that's the part of the sense of adventure. It's snowing, let's go. But for some guests, it's like, I'm not going to take that risk again. So water parks, and we have the largest water park in the United States located in our destination, which is Kalahari. One of their largest selling points is like we're not subject to weather fluctuations, but when you don't have power, you're absolutely subject to it, and that's a very, very strong message to the guest that, hey, I'm coming because I want my investment in my vacation protected, but then when you don't have power, how do you really go from there? So that's a counterintuitive to the guest that I think we'll pay for in the future. So the one thing I wanted to just say is how can we help? How can the Pocono Mountains Visitors Bureau help? We can do two things. We can communicate to the guests both inside and out of the destination. Our social media outlets, as far as opt-in, are staggering. We have hundreds of thousands of people that are opted into our feeds. Now, what we did is we gleaned from our friends in the press some points, and we actually took the initiative to send out messages that, hey, we're closed, here's the routes that are closed, here's what you really need to do. We can continue to do that. We want to help in these types of situations. We want to be an active participant in contingency and emergency planning as a resource. If there's any way that we can help, please call on us. We have a very strong communications and marketing team that is completely at anybody's disposal, local and state governments. We can communicate to the guests and hopefully stave off the guests coming into the destination to make the situation worse. Again, we understand this was an unprecedented event. But in the future, we're ready and willing, and we really want to help because we want to put the best face we can on this for the guests because by some of the statistics I've just shared, it's a very important industry for us. So I thank you very much for your time in listening and for recognizing that we're a very important industry. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I echo Chris's statements on the thank yous to everyone for allowing us to be here. I'd like to let you all know that I also chair a regional planning commission that includes 5 municipalities, soon to be 6. It's also important to note that we service the same customers that the utility service, all of the residents in our municipalities. That region contains roughly 30 to 35,000 residents. I'll go through 3 quick examples of issues that we've had lately. All incidents are local as per the National Incident Management System. However, as we have experienced in storm emergencies, we find ourselves subject to the utility company's priorities. Critical infrastructure facilities have no true priority despite calls being made. These include emergency operations centers, transfer stations, fire companies, municipal buildings, etc. Example, the winter storm of March 2nd, 2018, we opened the Emergency Operations Center, which is located at the Township Municipal Building. Service was disrupted from Friday, March 2nd, 2018 through Wednesday, March 7th, 2018. We did have a backup generator in operation during that period, but we lost internet services due to a lack of electricity powering data through the cable line. This caused a relocation of the Emergency Operations Center and staff to the West End Fire Company Firehouse, which had retained service through the storm. The issue with that is very bad business to have your Emergency Operations Center and a warming shelter in the same facility dealing with the people. They don't commingle well, taking control of that situation. Question that we have on this is there an actual priority that is given to critical infrastructure facilities, or should we as municipalities be planning for alternative solutions? And secondly, if there is actual priority, how are we assured that our critical infrastructure is identified in that system? The second involves incident management. Whoever can open up a road should be required to. Using the same storm as the example, the emergency operations staff was handling calls, mapping road closures due to downed trees, and dispatching either township road crews or West End Fire Company volunteers to assist and open the roadways. Of course, if there were lines involved, the emergency operations staff was notifying PP&L and Blue Ridge Cable. In multiple circumstances, PP&L freed their lines and left Blue Ridge Cable lines in the road, keeping the roads closed. The township road crew and the fire company volunteers were unable to open the roadways, and follow-up calls, emails were required to make sure roads could be opened. Having better communication between utility providers and shared shared assessment mapping that is accessible by the Township Emergency Operations Center staff would be very helpful. We believe that PP&L would be the lead and coordinate with other entities as they develop and implement response plans. And finally, preventive maintenance. In order to assist with preventive maintenance, the Township Roadmaster forwards information to PP&L regarding trees on wires in addition to those likely to fall onto wires. We have examples here and photos that we can enter into the record. Our Roadmaster has been informed that PP&L will not respond unless there is an interruption in service. Should we continue to provide this information to PP&L, and are we using a proper procedure to submit this information? In closing, I'd just like to say that as a region, we want to be part of the solution to this problem. We don't believe that in most cases PP&L or any electric provider has any contact with the local municipalities, and I'll go right back to my opening statement, where we service the same customers, i.e. nursing homes, medical facilities, so on and so forth. So with that, thank you for your time. Appreciate the opportunity.
Oh, there we go. Okay. Yep. Thank you again. You know, I'm going to echo a lot of what some of the other panelists are saying when it comes to electric outages. And most of that is obviously storm related. You know, when I was putting together my thoughts for this presentation, my thoughts mainly came to the initial onset of when that power goes out and how it affects emergency services, particularly law enforcement. Generally, it's due to an ice storm, a windstorm, heavy snow, something of that nature. And based on that storm, law enforcement is stretched to begin with. Normally, it's roadway safety. So we start experiencing from the onset automobile accidents. Some of those automobile accidents can be severe. So they may require 2 or 3 officers to be there to close that road down until we can get fire in place and stabilize it and conduct that investigation. If during that time all of a sudden we start getting the trees down, the wires down, the power outages, that further stretches our resources. So, you know, in the last windstorm that we experienced in the Pocono Mountain regional area, is we were getting trees down and wires down about every 15 minutes. We were getting a call on that. And as a note of reference, really, as far as the Pocono Mountain Regional Police goes, we are the largest landmass of any regional police department in the state. We cover approximately 238 square miles with 41 officers. So we can get stretched very thin very quickly. So again, what we start experiencing is those roadway episodes. Now, once that power goes out, what compounds that is that we lose traffic signals. So now, as Senator Scavello knows, we start losing traffic signals at the 5 points in Mount Pocono, which is a very heavily congested intersection. Now it's compounded with snow and ice, and now we're diverting resources to that to get that stabilized. Then we start getting wires down, poles down, electrical fires, things of that nature, and that's going to further stretch us. So that's kind of what we experience on the onset of these. I'm going to echo again what Chuck said as far as opening the roadways. When we had the storm of March 2nd, you know, what we experienced was people were getting the car stuck in the middle of the road and just abandoning them. So it wasn't as simple as just getting a plow out and plowing those roads. We had to plow to the cars, then get the cars towed so we can continue to plow. So we had to coordinate our tow trucks, our road crews to get those roads open. Now, where that leads into power is when we're trying to restore power and the power companies are trying to get their crews out, they can't get them to where they need to be until we open our roads. So it is a joint effort on all emergency services, utilities, even going right into private companies like our tow companies. So it really needs to be a coordinated effort, and that's where, again, the coordination between utility companies, whether it be our cable companies and our electric utilities, to get together that maybe one crew can solve both problems rather than leaving certain lines across the road and not repairing others. The other situations we run into is generally the power companies will never give us an ETA. So if we have officers or even fire sitting on wires across the roadway and we're getting stretched. And, you know, during this time, it may not only be our accidents that are coming in, our roadway hazards. We may be getting violent crime, you know, things of that nature, where we're trying to release our officers, and we're asking for an ETA because we have live wires across the roadway, and we will not get an ETA, which I understand is difficult, may not be practical in the end of the electric utility companies, but that makes it difficult on us to free our resources to get to other areas that need to be addressed. Some of the other things that occur, and certainly don't want to take the wind out of Mr. Wisniewski's sails, but we start to experience things like alternate fuels. So we start to get, you know, dangers from carbon monoxide poisoning. We start to get welfare checks, things of that nature. Maybe chimney fires start to happen because somebody's using a chimney that they haven't used in a couple years. So we start to get the alarm calls, we start to get the fire calls and the welfare calls. As far as solutions, you know, really when I look at it from our perspective, to me the easiest solution is, again, like Representative Rader stated, is simply having a better way to assess problem trees, maybe increasing our easements to cut those trees back away from the lines, that if a branch falls, it's not bringing down the entire line. Maybe it would hang a little bit, but you wouldn't get the branch coming down, or the main part of the tree coming down and bring that wire down. So I think maybe assessment, increasing easements back away from those lines may be a solution. And certainly there's other experts that can weigh in on that. But that's really what we face from a law enforcement perspective. And again, I thank you for having me, and you know, I'm certainly open to any questions towards the end.
Thank you very much, Chief. You got my wheels spinning on a couple other ideas up here we'll talk about later, but fine gentlemen from the Volunteer Fire Company, thank you very much for being here, and thank you for your service, because oftentimes it's you two that are on scene first, and you got to be making a lot of coordination. Thank you.
Again, I'll echo the thank you to the panel and the guests. A little nervous, first time involved here. I am so glad Chuck and Chris went before me. They touched on a lot of what I had to say. So as a volunteer organization, I'm going to touch on my budget real quick, because the strain that this puts on a volunteer fire company is tremendous. None of the money that we spend on situations like this is recouped. It's money that is not in our budget. We only receive approximately $50,000 from the state to run our fire company. We have a township tax, approximately 1%, approximately $90,000. So we get about $140,000 to run our fire company on approximately $300,000 budget. Our township is very good to us. They help with our insurance and fuels and so on and so forth. But the rest is fundraising. So we spend a lot of time, for no other word, begging for money. And all that money that we have that comes in situations like this blows right out the door, which affects us heavily on everything else, our maintenance, payments on the vehicles. This storm in particular was really hard. We had our command set up in our hall, and we had approximately 135 calls within a 12-hour period. You're looking at about 30 volunteers trying to handle that. Mutual aid at the time is non-existent because every other township is out doing what we're doing. So we get a call back to our own firehouse because the roof blew off. So our truck got blown off the road, brand new truck. The storm was tremendous. As far as power, the problem that we have is, even though the lines are down, we understand PP&L is not going to come out, hook everything up. They really need to try and come out and at least get the lines out of the road. Not asking them to hang them again, just get them out of the road to give us access to be able to open these roads. Areas like ours, Chestnut Hill and so forth, you close one road, you could have 4 to 5 miles just to get around to the other side of that tree. In an emergency response, that's tremendous. A tremendous amount of time. The ambulances can't get through, the police can't get through. We work with the townships to open the roads. But as long as there's a wire there, you can look up, you can see if the breaker is broke, but that still doesn't mean I'm gonna go move a wire off the road. So the tree trimming during that storm, our fire company was basically a staging area for quite a while with the tree trimmers. I talked to tree trimmers as far away as Iowa, Kentucky, Tennessee, Georgia. They were all at our firehouse. Every one of those companies' complaint was there's more tree trimmers, not enough linemen. They're sitting around for hours doing nothing, waiting for a power company to clear them to go in and cut these trees. Well, they can't go in and cut the trees, and the power line people can't get in, PP&L can't get in unless the trees are cleared. So there needs to be a little more communication as far as your tree trimming crews coming in, being able to remove these trees, and a power company at the same time. Again, they touched on a lot of the stuff I had to say, so thank you.
No, very good. Thank you. I think that kind of helps round it up. All right, members' questions. I'll start on my right. Representative Saccone shaking his head.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. Thank you for your service, especially in these times of emergencies. The big resorts up here, like the Kalahari, they don't have backup power generation. They don't think it's in their interest to have backup power generation?
To my knowledge, they do not, no.
I mean, even in my home, I have a backup generator that I can run at least the emergency things. They don't.
Yeah, I can't answer that question. I'm not sure what the thought process was. I mean, they've just gotten up to 100% capacity within the last year, so maybe that's part of a future plan. But at this point in time, they do not have that capacity.
Yeah, I would think that would be part of the discussion. I mean, that's in their interest to have that. So, I noticed that, especially I'm from the other side of the state. We have a lot of down tree problems in the valleys, and trees hanging over the wires. And what about preemptive tree cutting? Now, I know there's an expense to this, but I feel like in a lot of areas where I've checked into it, property owners are not being held responsible for trees that are hanging over that they should, I think, at least have a part in saying, look, this is on my property, it borders a road. If this tree falls down in a storm, it's going to take out power for the whole area. What do we do with the property owners have any responsibility to trim trees that are near wires? Does the fire departments take on this whole responsibility of when something's downed? Can we coordinate between property owners and local municipalities to make sure that people are doing their part?
The hard part, Representative Saccone, is that if you look in our township in particular, we have 156 miles of road, over 300 lane miles. Most of it wooded, not all of it, but most of it. And the average person doesn't have the wherewithal to do that. Secondly, the safety issue, typical tree, I guess about 20 inches across, we just got a cost estimate, $1,200. On some of these properties, you may have 5 or 6. I don't understand why the power company either doesn't want to go underground, and I understand that's probably a big expense to do that initially, but maintenance-wise, it takes that whole issue out of play. There are areas where, depending on the type of forest that you have, you don't get those massive trees. But I have some pictures here to put into the record that are not, it's not a matter of if it's going to cause a problem, it's when. And the response we get from the power company is, we've suffered no power outage. Well, people will die if they try to cut these trees down themselves. They just can't do it. And financially, I think it would be an unfair burden for them. I wish I had a better answer, but I simply don't.
Yeah, obviously there's going to be a cost to all this.
Absolutely.
And I know the
Yeah.
power companies aren't going to want
Yep.
to do it, even though part of it's in their interest to get them down ahead of time, but municipalities have an interest and property owners have an interest, so I understand your point.
I'm not saying it shouldn't be a shared cost, however that works out, but there are lots of issues, especially on the major transmission lines. If you got one of those to go down, you shut off hundreds of places with one tree issue. How these right-of-ways are handled, I honestly don't know. I know in our municipal right-of-ways, some are 20 feet, some are 30 feet, some are 50. So I'm sure the utility companies deal with those same issues. That is part of I believe, a broader conversation that should take place with the power companies and the municipalities and all the other emergency service providers.
Thank you.
I suspect we're going to probably address that again with our second panel, but I'm going to throw something out there for both you and that panel to think about. Is I'm curious at how many of these properties are public properties versus private. I have to confess, my mother was probably in most electric companies' nightmare because she didn't want anything cut. And she didn't want to cut it when a tree fell on something. She would only take that half of the tree off. So, sometimes that's problematic when landowners are not cooperative, proactively or after a storm. But I'm interested, and you can think about this, is some of this state land, game commission land, or other lands that we may have some ability to adjust it on.
I would agree wholeheartedly. You can probably make good impact on the state game lands because they'll be willing to work, I would believe. I can't speak for them, but obviously they'd be willing to work with it. There are things where you see them do on the right-of-ways different types of plantings that are lower and out wider so that they don't grow up to cause that problem in the future. Game Commission would probably be a great place to start with that for the example. As far as the other properties, we could, through mapping in our township, give you an idea of what our municipality owns where there's power lines through it. I can tell you it's a relatively small percentage, probably less than 0.5% where the power lines go through.
Thank you. I mean, it would be my guess, and I don't want to belabor things, but really it's not the fire company's responsibility taking trees down. Last thing we really want volunteers doing is doing those types of things from a safety perspective. Representative Jack Rader, then Representative Rosemary Brown.
And Chris, thank you for your testimony. I was thinking about the smaller businesses and the impact of when the power goes out. They can't recoup that money. It could start shutting some businesses down. I know I've talked to some small business owners. You've got to send your people home. You have to give them their money back. The other people can't come in. You have a wedding or something that occurs. You got to send all those people home. You can't make reservations for future business. It's just, and if you're out 4 or 5 days, you're a small business. You can't afford to lose 5 days.
I think you encapsulated that pretty succinctly. Some of these businesses, that's their season.
Right.
2 or 3 weeks, especially some of our members that really rely on that season, they're done.
Yeah.
So the impact is incredibly significant. You're right.
Yeah. So I think the larger resorts sometimes can, work through that. The smaller people can't. And in small business, same thing. I just am concerned about that. I know what could happen. It could drive some businesses out of business.
Heard that.
And that's
definitely.
a shame. And Chuck, I appreciate your comments too, because I think there's a great asset there. And I think all townships have emergency service coordinator. I don't think utilities are using these coordinators properly, using the townships properly. They're great assets there. It's the same way with the police and the fire companies. There are assets there. They're willing to help. They're there to help. And no one's using them at this point. And I think that would really help the situations. Everybody coordinated their effort and helped each other out to try and get these roads open, trying to get the lines back up. I think it would really help the power companies if they use that asset. I know they're not using it now. You call my office and say, hey, we got this and this, and I have to try and coordinate. But I think it should be done directly with the townships, and I think that would really help the power companies, and they're not using that asset now. Do you have a comment on that?
Yeah, I would agree 100%, Representative Rader. In our region currently, we're in the process of developing a shared EOC center, which would allow, in this last storm that we used as the example, all 5 municipalities, possibly the 6th one coming in, to coordinate that effort with the power companies. That could have huge impacts in dollar savings, speed of restoration of power, all of that. But it is more than just the power companies. Cable's also involved because emergency responders are directed. You go out, if there's a wire in a tree, we don't care what wire it is, you gotta assume it's live, and you're gonna have a problem if you get into that. So it will be a long process to put this together, but we'd welcome that conversation to take place with our region planning partners.
Yeah.
Because we've all experienced the same thing, especially in this past winter, so.
Yeah, and I know the police are always there to help, and if they could coordinate a little bit better, they're not part of the process at this point, and I think everybody should be. Same, Mike, you did a great job testifying too. Same way the volunteer fire companies, they're there to help, yet they're not part of the loop, and I think it slows the process down of fixing some of these issues. But thank you for your testimonies.
Senator Scavello and Representative Doyle Heffley.
Thank you all for your testimony. And Representative Rader, right on the end there, almost took my full question. We think alike, obviously, but the emergency management coordinator, and Chuck, I'm looking at you because that's where we were talking, even though everybody is involved with it. It has been a real point for me lately that I feel very strongly about, that those positions are volunteer positions for each township, but I don't feel that we're utilizing them enough, and I don't even know if they're getting maybe the training that they really need to have to be the most effective to work with everyone. So I think that's something that I'm looking at to see what this training is, and does it need to be improved? What are we doing to really make that position as strong as it should be, as we need it to be? But on top of that, the opening of the roads came up in almost everyone's testimony. So the piece that I'm always wondering is, we seem like we're spinning our wheels, whether it's not using the emergency coordinator, but how often does a list of priority roads get from the townships to the county office, to the utility companies? Does that happen consistently, as far as, because there is a volume, like you said, that there's a reasonable expectation of what can happen when it's so bad. But on a priority list of road 1, 2, 3, 4, this is a township of what we want to see you focus on to clear these roads. How often does all that happen to the county level?
Well, if I may, I'll start at the municipal level first. While all municipalities have, or are supposed to have, emergency coordinators, the fact is you're talking one person with maybe a laptop, and the volume of the calls that came in just for Chestnut Hill Township during the storms that we were talking about and the chief was talking about, we handled like 90-some calls over less than a 3-hour period. There's no way that an average municipality with one person can handle all that. It's humanly impossible. Secondly, most of the municipalities, and Mike spoke to this a bit, rely on mutual aid because of the number of volunteers dwindling nationwide, not just here or anywhere else in the state, but nationwide. And what happens in something of this scale, everybody's out doing their own thing in their own jurisdiction. There is no mutual aid. If we have a major event on a highway, just in our township, we may pull resources from all of our regional planning partners, in fact, from municipalities from other areas in other counties, depending on what that type of equipment is that's needed. We have a book that's about that thick that details all of this. It's impossible for any municipality to walk that on their own. You just can't do it. Financially, staff-wise, that's why this Emergency Operations Center that we're talking about is so important, because you can pool the volunteer resources and you could manage these things on a larger level, potentially. As far as the county, our information goes from our EOC into the county. They get it. But now they have a little bit bigger staff, but they pretty much, what we're being told, get the same response that we get from the power company. Okay, we have it. That's it. We don't, as a municipality, have a direct number to call anybody in any public utility and get a live body on that phone. We don't have that.
So, but is it, so the roads are given, or the calls are given to the county office, but is there a priority? Is it listed as a priority level from the township to the county?
Yes, from our end, for example, Brookmont, the nursing facility would be a priority level. If we have known shut-ins that rely oxygen, things like that. Our biggest problem wasn't when we had to move our facility, it was having power through the lines to keep your internet access up. You can't get to all these other things that you need without, that's the way of the world today. So yeah, it moves forward, but where it goes from there, keeping in mind now, there's 20 municipalities in Monroe County alone, so that control center is handling probably the same level of calls from at least 15 of them. Not all areas are hit the same level, but so I don't know if that answered your question
No,
directly.
it gives me an idea, and I think that's, I'm just trying to hone in a little bit on the communication level. Like Mike said, as far as, I think everybody seems to know different things that are out or things that are needed, but yet it kind of hits the fan, and it's just, is anybody really focusing where, the priority down when it's so bad?
If we had the ability for our region, and I'll speak just to PPNL, even though Med Ed has some of it. If we had the ability with PPNL to have the same, for the lack of a better term, attack plan that they would have in major outages, what are their priorities? What are our priorities? Get those focused. Get when the tree cutters are coming in, we heard the same thing that Mike was saying. They're sitting there waiting to go cut the trees down. They couldn't get the power shut off because you can't assume that the line's dead. You have to assume it's live. So that's what I had recommended early on in my testimony, that if we had that process begun where the municipalities, you guys, the power companies, emergency services can sit down together, it's going to be a long process to get this together, but it's not impossible.
Thank you.
I hope that answered.
Well, to start, definitely. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the two storms that we've had in our area, I haven't seen anything like in 32 years since I've been up here. Especially the first one with the storm, that snowstorm, it didn't start till about 10:30, so people went off to work, and they all got stuck on the roads. What I saw on 611 and 940, you couldn't get anywhere once that snow continued to come down. The second one, it had rained for about 5 or 6 days of soaking rain, and then you had the hurricane winds, and the trees went down like dominoes. I've never, in the time that I've been here, I've never seen anything like that. The two storms pretty much crippled us. Looking at there was a question with Kalahari. They do have a generator for lighting and things like that, but I believe that there's been contact with PPL to help with a secondary power, because in that particular facility on one of those days, there was 8,000 people in that building. So you cannot be without power. 8,000 people that don't understand that the electricity went out, don't want to understand it. But I just want to thank all of you for what you do, and especially the volunteer fire company, because getting the volunteers to get to the firehouse had to be a problem, right? That had to be, you probably had to go out and get them. But, and Chief, I know what you went through. It wasn't an easy couple of days there. Thank you.
And if I could, Senator Scavello, when we talk about Kalahari and the 8,000 residents there, and as my previous testimony stated, is that we do get stretched pretty thin very rapidly. When you have 8,000 residents that are stranded, that want to get home, that can't be fed properly, they get grumpy pretty quick. And we did start getting calls to Kalahari of large numbers of their guests that were on the verge of riot, really. They were down in the lobby demanding to know when the roads are going to be open, when the power's back on, and they're not happy. So that's something that's very difficult to deal with. And plus, when we have these storms, we are on an island. Until the interstates start getting opened up, we are on an island. So it does become critical very rapidly. And that goes to Representative Brown's question with incident command and emergency operations centers, is some of the problems that happen there is that we can't get our decision makers to a joint location, because we can't get them. If we were to open up an emergency operations center at the Monroe County Safety Center, how do we get anybody there when the interstates are closed and the secondary roads are closed? So that becomes very difficult. So you're trying to manage that now by phone, which can be ineffective. You're trying to, do some things over the internet. But like Chuck said, if the internet's down, now you're having difficulties with communication there. So it does these things quickly, no pun intended, but they snowball very rapidly. So.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess going back to the generator issue, during Hurricane Sandy at my house personally, I think we were out like 13 days, and I think there's been quite a few snowstorms. So we live in the mountains. We love it. But you deal with the weather, and most people up here that live in the Pocono area are prepared. But I would have to say for the larger resorts, I don't know if it would go back to local zoning or other requirements. But I mean, there's all kinds of codes out there how to build everything. But I think when you're looking at facilities that are that large, especially that are year round, knowing that it's just a matter of time till the next snowstorm. And when you have that wet, heavy snow, there really isn't. I mean, I've driven many miles on the road. I've sat hours in traffic delays on the first snowstorm. I was up on Route 380. I think we sat for 2 hours before you get turned around and come back down in a whiteout. And it really isn't. I mean, PennDOT is doing as much as they can, but then you can't get the salt trucks to drop the salt to shed to get the trucks out. It's just compounds itself. But I do think we need to look at how those larger resorts, we welcome the area, we want them in the area, we want to work with them, and don't want to put a mandate on it, but I think there needs to be some consideration to, at least for coolers and for heat, to keep food and those basic things when people, because it could happen again, and anytime you go anywhere, if you go to a resort by the beach, you could have a hurricane or anything, people get stranded, it does happen, but to be a little bit more prepared and forward-looking, I think that would be important. And I know the fire departments, I know in Carbon County, they do a lot of outreach on generator safety. We've had some instances with CO2 buildup in a house. So I think that those type of outreach for cleaning chimneys and generator safety when you need that, I think that's important. Looking out and to the future. I commend everybody for the hard work that you do, and especially in these trying times with the weather conditions. But I think it's something that we could look at as a way to be better prepared for the next instance, whether it be a storm like Hurricane Sandy, which wasn't a snow event, but also we had a lot of power outages then too. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to follow up as well. And I know it's mostly rural, mostly townships here, but during Hurricane Sandy, some of our boroughs set up emergency command posts and also coordinated, had a plan in place that they would call volunteers in. So, Chris might be in charge of a certain section of the borough and do welfare checks and know what streets are on. Now, I understand you're saying, well, you can't even coordinate because your lines are down, your internet's out. So that doesn't work really well in the townships. But then I find that, after Hurricane Sandy, they met for about a year. Where can we go? What church can we go to? You don't want people driving, especially in a snowstorm, you want them off the road. So you want to get a local place for them to go. But I think how hard is it to coordinate it in township? The houses are far apart. So just because Chris is in one area, he might not have a lot of houses around him. But the boroughs even kind of left that go by the wayside because, Hurricane Sandy's over, a year's passed, and we don't have anything, and now comes a snowstorm. And the people who volunteered to be the contacts for a certain area in the municipality, they don't live there, their truck's not working with the snowplow. So, how hard is that to coordinate to keep a group of volunteers within a municipality updated and contacting you to contact the power companies?
We have designated warming shelters, for example, which we've had for years. Most municipalities have them. The hard part is, Representative Hahn, I'll go right back to the issue of where not necessarily are our priority sites the same priority sites for the power companies. And in this last storm, I think we had 90-some trees down that took lines down. That's a massive amount of coordination. And to know that in one area there's a warming shelter that's cut off, to put that out, after the internet went down, we can't even get that information out to our public, which is about 18,000. So is it impossible? Absolutely not. But we can put the best plan together that you could ever want to see. And if our plan doesn't overlay and mesh with the power company's plans, and the chief's plans don't mesh with the power company's plans, none of them will be as effective as they could be.
But is there a group that can coordinate and have a meeting and not forget about it? You know, so you don't meet just one time and come up with a plan, and then you have to keep those meetings going whether there's storms or not.
I
to
agree.
Coordinate.
And to get this done on a statewide level, thinking on a larger scale, and I mean no disrespect by this, but I would look to you guys to set that process up and have us be part of that process. I would suggest going through PSATs and whatever the equivalent of PSATs is for the boroughs, and start that conversation, because it is a massive conversation to have. I don't, right now, we would have, just speaking for Chestnut Hill Township, if we had to come up with 3 people right now today, we could, because of our emergency preparedness plan that we have. Some municipalities may not be able to do that. Some probably don't have the same issue that we have with that many miles of roads. I know that's a kind of a roundabout answer, but it's the best one I have for you.
No, and in this last storm, we even had a municipality said, okay, we have our shelter set up at this school. So I went out to the school, and they didn't know they were the shelter. There was no one there to even open the doors.
Right.
So I'm putting on my Facebook page and getting the word out that if you need water, you need something, go to this school, and there was no one there. So then, and I understand the difficulty, but just something I think we have to make sure we're up on all the time, not just wait until the storm hits.
I agree with you wholeheartedly, and we all need to shoulder some of the responsibility to get this done. We need to look, we can, as a township, get to the power company to have that conversation. We need your help to get that orchestrated, but we will shoulder some of the responsibility to make all this happen. It's the only way it can happen, if we all take a little bit of a stake in it and some responsibility for it. So, but thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. The senator mentioned that this was the worst pair of storms that he's seen in 32 years. So my curiosity is along the same theme, and I think primarily aimed for Chuck and Mike. I presume you're both are longtime residents. Do you feel as though storms of this extreme nature are more frequent nowadays? And do you feel as though the power outages are coordinated also are as extreme and as frequent nowadays?
Mike, if I may, I'm a lifelong resident of Monroe County, 61 years old. These last 10 years have been the most horrific weather pattern that I've seen. Why that's occurring, I don't know. I can tell you right now, with the rains that we've been suffering lately, we all better be happy that we didn't have those high winds, or those storms in December and March would have been pale by comparison on what we'd face right now. I'm dreading September, because that's usually when hurricane season comes in, and I can show you what's happened on our farm locally with certain things. But yeah, they're definitely more severe by far, magnitude way more.
Mike?
Yeah, just to touch on that, it's one of the things, I just want to jump back real quick to Senator Hahn. A lot of I'm sorry. I didn't want to say Marcia. I just would, the word volunteer is a big word. To get people to volunteer today is next to impossible. You can't get anybody to come in and volunteer their time anymore. So trying to get more people on board, more people involved, it's extremely hard. And no one has come up with any type of solutions or ideas to get people to volunteer. So every time we use the word volunteer, it kind of like stabs me, because it hurts, because it's just more and more being put on us. So.
Real quick on that, Mike, what do you think the average age of your volunteers are?
We're getting old. Seriously, we're getting
Talking
old.
39 old like Rosemary, or?
Yeah.
I would say our average age is probably right around 30. It used to be years ago, generation. The sons were coming in, and Now you have, I don't have time. A lot of it has to do with the education and training. The state mandates more training now. You have, I think it's, the new training is 188 hours for a basic firefighter. So somebody coming in that does not know anything, well, everybody has to go through the essentials to be certified anyway. That's 188 hours that you're asking somebody to do that works 40 to 50 hours a week and weekends. And your classes are at night, your classes are on the weekends. A lot of people don't want to be involved in it because it does take a lot. I understand you need training, but we all know that. But the time involved is very tough.
What is the expectation on continual training hours per year after the initial 180?
It's continual training, just all the way from your CPR, which has to be recerted every 2 years. Your hazmat ops is in every year. The training, as far as your in-house training, that's every week. So it's constantly an ongoing training, and everything is new. Your new stuff that's evolving and all that. It gets very involved, and then you also have in your certain areas new things coming in. Modern gas being one of ours that used to fill your barbecue tanks because they had one big tank. Well, now they're putting in a fourth tank. These tanks, not sure on the gallonage of them, but for one fire company to handle, it's impossible. So your training now is stepped up. It's not your 20-pound barbecue tank. You're talking 100,000 gallons of propane in one spot. Right. So the training is just continually.
Well, thank you. Your volunteer comments are very, very important to this overall discussion. Representative Coffer, thank you for your patience.
Chairman, I just want to finish that question if I may real quick.
You may, you're bigger than I am.
Chuck, so based on your response there, do you feel as though we have increased hardship because we've seen an uptick in population and resorts, or do you feel as though it's because of aging infrastructure or deteriorating infrastructure?
I think it's all of the above. There's no doubt in my mind. Aging infrastructure, yes. I can only speak what I see with PP&L that I'm a customer to. They seem to have upgraded a lot of things. The response time is primarily what we're talking about from my end here today. As far as the resorts, we don't have any resorts in our township, so I really don't know. I'll defer that to Chris.
I was speaking regionally.
Oh, yeah, I mean, sure, there's absolutely, if you have 8,000 people in one resort and there's a power outage, sure, there's going to be hardship there. I believe, though, that the focus, or at least an equal focus, should be on the nursing homes and those facilities, because those literally are life-threatening situations. The chief has a lot to deal with Kalahari there, but you got some people are upset because they didn't get a meal. I get that, and I do feel bad about that. But somebody on fixed oxygen and needing medical supplies and things like that, my world has to rise to the highest level of concern.
Okay, that was the comments I was looking for. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will be brief because I see we're right at the time that we are allotted for this panel. So thank you for your indulgence. I want to just make a comment. A lot of townships, boroughs have EMA directors. So I would assume that in a lot of the municipalities we're talking about, and you sort of gave us a challenge on how we can coordinate these efforts. And I would say that the best way of coordinating these efforts is through the EMA directors for each of the municipalities to work together with the power companies, to work together with our law enforcement, our fire departments, to come together and develop these plans for all these different type of events. We, in one of my municipalities in my area, we have flooding that happens regularly, and our EMA director developed a plan of how we're going to coordinate that, working with our different utilities on how we're going to address it for the next incident that should happen, knowing that that's a frequent incident that happens in one community that I represent. So I just sort of throw that back as an idea, because obviously when we're given sort of these hardships, there's an opportunity to take, okay, what have we learned from our last one, and how can we better coordinate this? So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, one of the things Representative Crawford, that I agree 100% with you. Municipalities have to share some of that responsibility. Our biggest problem with dealing with that responsibility is we need to look to you guys to get the power companies. How do you find a way to get them to sit down with us? We can ask all we want. It doesn't seem to go anywhere. So we're asking you to help facilitate that. We're not saying we won't be active participants and bring our game to the table and help get this problem solved, but we have to get that table has to be set. We don't have the power and the authority to get that table set. We'll be there. I'll give you my word on that.
Well, I can promise you, after sort of listening to what's happened up here, I'm lucky that, I haven't been hit with any terrible hardships in my times in office, some flooding incidents, some things like that. But you sort of lit a fire under me that I'm going to go back and contact all my EMA directors in my municipalities to work on getting this put together with our utilities. I'd encourage other people at this table to do the same, to try to put together these meetings, get everybody in the same room, develop these plans, work on this, because it sounds like something that we can help facilitate. So.
Agree 100%. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before we close out this panel, I also want to thank you for your efforts. A lot of things have come up. I hate to acknowledge the fact that I'm old enough that I served as county coroner in 93 and 94, and after 93 blizzard, we never thought that was going to happen again, and I was one of those idiots left his car in the middle of the road at 2:30 in the morning after Governor Ridge already shut the roads off at 12. But I raise that for two reasons. One, that was pre-cell phones. I walked for miles until I got to our local state police barracks, which is not there, but that's where I spent the night. But I remember, this goes to your earlier comment, you said for incident management, whoever can open a road should. Well, I left the car there thinking it was never going to be there the next morning or in a million pieces when the first plow went through, because it was 2 feet of snow by the time I abandoned it. But it was actually West Penn that moved it off the road. I don't have any problem with that. Do we have instances where people are afraid to take those actions? Is the state snow plow or the local municipalities because of liability? Are we also liability? And with that in mind, in your 6 regions you mentioned, is there someone within proximity of all of our counties in these regions that you can call to be the line guy that at least can say, this line has power, this line doesn't have power? Because at the end of the day, all this boils around to nobody wanting to move. Because we've had instances when I was, like I say, when I was coroner, where the line's draped over the car. You got a victim in the car. Well, do you send 2 EMS people in there to help take care of the one victim that's in there? How much time are we talking about, or is there a regional rep that can get that line cleared, whether it has power or not? Or is that something we could probably work on?
That's something that needs to be worked on, because we don't know. We make those calls where these lines are down. We get no response back. Okay, power's off, you can go do what you got to do. We don't get anything. I think, and in fairness to the power companies, in this last storm, their staff was probably just overwhelmed also. But that's where that priority scale comes in, where if you already have a fatality in a car, if there's no one else in there that's hurt, terrible about that, but that no longer is a priority. You got to go to the living for the priority. And the power companies don't have the ability, I don't think. I don't think it's the people, I think it's the process. There is no process in place for them to give us the information that we need to affect what we do.
And I'll close on it, because I think it's important for those that are listening, for the media people here, to remind our listeners and those who may read about this in the paper, it's not like you have a lineman every block. Every fire company doesn't have a lineman. It'd be nice to be able to do that. The reality is, you're right, they're going to react to where they got to go. And in the same token, I think there are a lot of preventive things we can do as individuals. We know when these storms are coming. We have better communication abilities than we ever had, especially in 93, that I remember after Ridge closed the roads, guess what? People were still on the roads. It was kind of cute. Nobody's on the road. I'm the only guy on the road. I can go faster than I went before. And so, sometimes we're victims of our own, behaviors of making bad choices, or, kind of testing the waters here. But This testimony has been very helpful. I'm going to turn the microphone over to Jack to introduce the next panel. Gentlemen, thank you very much. If you can stay around, there may be further questions. If you need to leave, we understand, but thank you very, very much. Very, very good information.
Thank you all. We should roll right into it. I think because time is of the essence here, I think we should probably start right into our next panel if we could do that. If everybody come back in if they want to hear what the pros have to say here. And we'll start up right away. And I want to thank the previous panel. I asked them to be brief, but obviously with the people I had up front there, they were never going to be brief, but thank you to the previous panel. We got a lot of really good information, which hopefully everybody was listening and we can use for the future. And our second panel, who we have here, if I forget somebody or mess up your name, just let me yell out and let me know. I know him for that. Vice Chairman of the PUC, Andrew Place, and Dan Searforce. Did I get it right? This one might be easier. David Cooper, MedEd, and David Queer, PPL Electric Utilities. So I don't know who wants to go first. Maybe we start. Do you want to hear them first before you comment?
I'm happy to go first if you'd like.
Yep, I would like that.
All
Go right ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Benninghoff, Representative Rader, and members of the committee. I'm Andrew Place, as noted, Vice Chairman of the Public Utility Commission, and it's a pleasure to be back in front of you this morning. Last time I saw you, I was in Media PA looking at natural gas transmission issues. Joining me today is Dan Searforce, the Manager of Water Reliability and Emergency Preparedness for the Commission's Bureau of Technical Utility Service. I would note, it's not in I will editorialize here, that Dan is second to none in his expertise and his commitment to his charge. I would also note that I drove up last night from Greene County, which is where my home is, and I think it took me 3 days to get here. But it is a reminder of the diversity and grandeur of our Commonwealth, but also an object lesson in the necessariness for our living and our working in this Commonwealth of utility services and how many trees we have. Firstly, the Commission recently released its annual electric service reliability report detailing benchmarks and standards as well as the performance of the state's 11 PUC-regulated electrical distribution companies, or EDCs. Secondly, following a string of strong storms this past spring and summer, today's session provides a forum for continued discussion of electric reliability, resilience, and restoration, including concerns raised by consumers and communities here in northeastern Pennsylvania, as well illustrated by the previous panel. Lastly, today's hearing affords me the opportunity to update the committee on the PUC's ongoing grid modernization work to address and implement key components help to shape the grid of the future. Work and preparation that is critical to ensure the continued economic competitiveness of our Commonwealth, the viability of our communities, and the safety and comfort of homes and businesses. Reliability is at the core of the PUC's statutory mission and its everyday work to ensure adequate maintenance, safety, and reliability of utility services. The Public Utility Code specifies that reliability is comprised of adequacy and security. Adequacy to provide sufficient volumes and deliverability of power, and security to design, maintain, and operate a system that can handle extreme conditions, emergencies, and cyber threats. Hand in hand with reliability is resilience, the ability of a power system to avoid or minimize the impacts of service interruptions and to adeptly recover. The Commonwealth also has reporting requirements designed to ensure continued safety, adequacy, and reliability of the transmission and distribution of electricity in the Commonwealth. A summary and evaluation of this data is published annually in the PUC's Electric Service Reliability Report, which is this, as I've noted previously. As I also noted, in the reliability report, one of the key causes of service outages in 2017 was the severity of the weather and the number of storms we experienced, again, which was clearly brought home in the last panel. There were 50 reported outage events reported by EDCs during 2017, the highest number since the PUC began collecting data in 1993. By comparison, the average annual number of storm events since the PUC began keeping records is 25.76. Again, we had 50 reportable outages in 2017, and it gets to Representative Fritz's question, the average being 25.76. Overall, as again noted in the reliability report, approximately 50% of the total minutes of service interruptions during 2017 were attributable to fallen trees or tree limbs. That is 400 million customer minutes of service interruptions impacting over 2 million customers. Again, speaking to the centrality of the tree issue, both on and off right-of-ways. However, even with the increased severe weather and threats from trees, we expect our EDCs to maintain performance at or below benchmarks. With regard to Northeast Pennsylvania electric utilities, both Penelec and Med-Ed continue to struggle to achieve both benchmark and standard reliability performance metrics, having failed to achieve benchmark performance for all 3 reliability metrics in each of the in 2017, and failed to achieve rolling 12-month reliability standards for 2/3 of the 4 quarters in 2017. As a result of these performance issues, the PUC has been closely monitoring Penelec's and Med-Ed's work management systems and reliability improvement plans, or RIPS. Notably, Med-Ed's and Penelec's long-term infrastructure improvement plans were approved in February 11, 2016. Med-Ed and Penelec modified their LTIPs in 2017 and increased the spending for remaining plan years. The LTIPs were designed to improve storm hardening, system resilience, and reliability. We are also currently conducting a midterm review of the company's LTIPs for reliability performance, among other items, and expect to issue an order on our determination in late August or by mid-September of this year. PPL, however, continues to consistently meet both benchmark and standard reliability metrics. PPL has had an LTIP in place since 2013, and its reliability and performance has improved each year. Specific to the recent nor'easters, the PUC's reliability and emergency preparedness staff worked closely with PEMA and other state agencies to assist county and local emergency management throughout the Commonwealth's Response and Coordination Center. The PUC staffed the CRCC, providing outage updates as well as coordinating the information flow. The PUC also initiated the Chairman and Utility Operation Conference Call procedure, providing utility management updates on restoration progress and identifying any unmet needs. This communication allowed the Commission to act quickly in coordinating between Med-Ed, PEMA, and Pike County, for example, when extra efforts were needed to clear roads and allow utility and other emergency personnel access. The PUC also participated in the elected official and municipal county official calls that were held by PECO, Med-Ed, and PPL. These calls were instituted as a best practice following reviews from previous storms. Additionally, following large events, the Commission's Bureau of Technical Utility Services issues data requests to the affected utilities and reviews information provided by the EDCs in their required outage reports. TUS also communicates with PEMA and county emergency management staff to develop lessons learned and implement new processes and procedures in advance of the next major storm event. Specific to the Northeast, the PUC participated in after-action meetings with Pike County Emergency Management, local and state elected officials, and utilities, for example, PPL, Med-Ed, and Verizon. Pike County's Emergency Management Agency has continued coordination with the utilities on lessons learned and action items going forward. The PUC and Med-Ed also participated in the Stroudsburg Bureau Council meeting on July 17, 2018, which focused on customer experience and general reliability concerns with Med-Ed. In addition, TUS staff is preparing a post-storm report for the March storms based on information gathered from the EDCs and discussions with stakeholders. TUS expects to have this report completed and publicly posted between late August and mid-September. More broadly, the Commission is examining policies that will shape a future grid that will be more resilient, mitigate system vulnerabilities, incorporate innovation, and continue to provide affordable, safe, and reliable power. Aging infrastructure is a shared problem among all utilities. The Distribution System Improvement Charge mechanism enables utilities through a surcharge in customers' bills to accelerate the replacement of aging facilities and infrastructure. To utilize a DISC, a regulated entity must submit an LTIP which provides a comprehensive strategy for capital replacement and improvement to address aging infrastructure, system integrity, reduce reliability risks, and maintain safe, adequate, and reasonable service. MedEd's initial LTIP, filed on October 19, 2015, increased capital spending from $76 million to $116 million for the 5-year period 2016 through 2020. MedEd updated that LTIP in March 2017, expanding spending by an additional $32 million over the next 5-year plan period. Penelec's initial LTIP increased capital spending from $106 million to $178 million over the same 5-year period. Penelec updated this LTIP to expand spending by an additional $13.7 million. PPL's initial LTIP investment included the years 2013 through 2017. Actual expenditures were $659 million. PPL filed its second 5-year LTIP in August 2017. Capital spending increase was increased to $903 million. Further, smart grid technologies, two-way communication between devices in the field and operations and control centers, allow for automatic switching of electric load, which can significantly reduce or eliminate the impact of storm outages. Smart grid devices in the field can also provide information that can identify potential reliability issues before they occur. Smart meters also contribute to resilience and reliability. These meters can deliver last gasp and restoration messages that enable faster detection of outages to speed power restoration by detecting embedded or nested outages. For example, PECO, who is fully implemented its smart meter program, following Superstorm Sandy, the utility estimated that 8,807 truck rolls were avoided, which equates to restoring power to customers 2 to 4 days sooner than otherwise would have been possible. Additionally, we are now seeing a build-out of microgrids, which are small independent electric networks, which provide for increased resilience during electric disruptions, peak load shaving and voltage smoothing, and increased integration of renewable and distributed energy resources. Again, thinking of the panel before us today, microgrids can be a technology that could substantially increase the resilience of these nodes that you've been speaking of. Modernizing rate design also holds the potential for greater efficiency, reliability, and resilience of the grid of the future. Act 58 of 2018 provides the Commission with additional authority to approve alternative rate-making methodologies. In closing, I hope that I provided, at least in part, an insight into the reliability and resiliency issues the Commission reviews and addresses. The Commission looks forward to working with the General Assembly, as well as regulated utilities and local leadership, to achieve the necessary standards of reliability and service for the Commonwealth's residential and business customers. Thank you very much, and I'll certainly be happy to answer any questions you have when the time comes.
You will hold the questions to the end, but Dan, do you have anything to add to that, or anything else to say?
And I'll look for the utilities to talk a little bit about this. The concerns in the last panel, we've heard this at the Pike. We met at Pike County, and a little bit in Stroudsburg as well. It's the road closures, road openings. Which depends on glass half full, glass empty. You're trying to get the roads open. That's a major issue. It was an issue when we did our post-storm report in Sandy. So I'm looking forward to the utilities. They have a best practice group they'll talk about. They work on these storm issues. But they have road closure processes developed. Do they always work the best? Not always. We get these huge events. But I'm looking forward to them talking about how it worked in this event and how they're going to improve it going forward.
Thank you, Dan. David, you want to go next? Thank you.
Good morning, Chairman Benninghoff, Representative Rader, Senators. A little closer. Good morning, Chairman Benninghoff, Representative Rader, Senator Scavello, and members of the committee. I'm Dave Cooper, Director of Operations Services for MedEd. My office is in Reading, Pennsylvania. MedEd serves 560,000 customers, give or take, in Pennsylvania. Together with our sister distribution companies, West Penn, Penelec, and Penn Power, all First Energy companies, we serve 2.1 million customers in the state of Pennsylvania. I appreciate the opportunity to testify today with you on behalf of MedEd, and it's my intent, as briefly as I can, to share with you the nature of the event, the impact of the outages we experienced, our response to these storms, and to share with you the challenges that we recognize are the most important and need our focus, our primary focus, going forward. So I will speak to both events, primarily to the March event. That was the more challenging one for our customers and your constituents in terms of restoration times. When you look at the Riley Quinn event, just a couple statistics about that event. That impacted 274,000 of MedEd's customers, so a little over 50%. There were 76,000 customer interruptions in Pike and Monroe County. And when you boil that down to the actual number of customers or the percentage of customers, our customers in these counties that were affected, it was 93% of Pike County customers and 89% of the Monroe County customers. 88% of all of these outages and interruptions were caused by, no surprise, trees. But the difficult part of that is that nearly all of these tree-related outages were caused by off right-of-way trees. These are trees that are outside of our legal right-of-way to touch. You're on property, private property owners own these trees, and we do not have the legal right to touch them. I am interested in where the conversation started to go earlier, where we talked about possible government-owned land. Maybe there's some opportunities, some outside-of-the-box type of opportunities going forward, either with government-owned or possibly PennDOT right-of-ways. The overall overriding factor for us that we dealt with in terms of the impact of this storm was that there was heavy damage in the right-of-ways. Particularly in Monroe County, right out of Shawnee Substation, there are 4 34,500 volt feeders that are the source for all of Pike County. All of those circuits were devastated not far from the substation. And these circuits, along with 5 other circuits up in Pike County, were damaged so severely that the right course of action was to completely disconnect them from the system and more or less just swarm them with resources to essentially and as safely as possible and as efficiently as possible repair everything before you turn the power back onto that line. A normal process is you work out from the substation and you energize as you go. These circuits were so heavily damaged that that wasn't practical. So that added up to a total of 660 circuit miles that were in that type of condition. And I just tell you this to try to impress upon you the magnitude of this event for MedEd. In terms of response, we had about 2,300 employees total that were involved in the restoration efforts in Pike and Monroe County. 900 of them were line workers. 700 of those were either from our sister companies or from contractors that we brought in to help us. We had 450 vegetation management workers and 270 hazard responders / damage assessor personnel. 2 of those that were contractors that came on board to help us. During these types of events, we proactively send a liaison from MedEd into the county EMAs to help navigate many of the difficulties that we talked about earlier. And we feel that that is a very productive and efficient process, giving you a lifeline right into the company, knowing who to contact, somebody understands the process. So that's a standard part of our restoration process. In addition, we did stand up 3 staging sites. 2 of them were in the Stroudsburg area. 1 was down in the Northampton County area. And a staging site, if you haven't seen them, we basically set up what I will call similar to a tent city, where we're able to provide food, lodging, materials, work management, and locations to put vehicles and meet and coordinate without swarming the highways or our service centers. So the magnitude of the event, our response, the challenges that we worked through during this event, and this is meant to just be an open, clear, transparent discussion of what those challenges were. The event was difficult to forecast. Our ability to align and bring in resources up front and be ready, we are very proactive in that type of activity. We began monitoring this event on Monday, I think it was the 25th, and this storm and the forecast rapidly changed. On Wednesday, it was relatively a wind event in the southwest part of our territory. By Friday morning, the forecast had dramatically changed to include 14 to 20 inches of heavy snow, and ultimately that's what we saw up here, and I think in Pike County it was even greater than that, with winds in excess of 55 mile an hour. But my point that I want to make here is that with that rapid transition in a short amount of time, our ability, well, along with that, it turned out to be an event that was region-wide. It impacted all of MedEd's footprint. It impacted the entire region. And that slowed our ability to collapse or focus all of our internal resources on to the hardest hit area, Pike and Monroe counties. I mean, of all of our outages, 30% of them were in 2 counties. But we honestly had our hands full across our footprint. Along with that, when you look at a region-wide event like this, and when all the electrical utility companies see an event like this, they're holding on to the contractors that they have that they could potentially release. And they'll release them once they know they're in the clear. So, in which they weren't until a few days into the event. So the way that the storm developed and then impacted and dramatically changed right before it impacted were factors for us in terms of our preparation at the beginning.
Just for clarification, when you say contractors and releasing them, I'm assuming you're subbing out some tree removal people or other types of things, or am I misunderstanding?
No, you're
what
correct.
you mean?
Yeah, I'm referring to line workers, hazard responders, damage assessors.
So these are people in addition to your
forestry.
own staff that
Yes.
you may be subbing out that may be more local and know the area and be able to dispatch
Yes.
quicker. Okay, it's good to differentiate that. Sometimes we get the internal lingo. And
Yes.
just for those not even here but listening, I wanted to clarify that.
Yes.
Thank you, David.
Okay, you're welcome, Chairman. In addition, a couple other factors, and this definitely, there's a couple things that here affected the public's perception as well. For one, the wind event, we stayed in high wind conditions into Saturday. And there are safety requirements about operations of aerial devices, which largely kept us from operating our booms and putting men up in the air on Saturday. Another factor was on Wednesday the 7th, when the second storm came through and dropped anywhere from another 10 to 18 inches of snow in the area. That we had to curtail our restoration operations that day, somewhere around noon, honestly, for the safety of the employees, the right-of-ways, the roadways. But the end result was, more or less a larger part of a day of restoration efforts lost. And then along with that, and this is something that we deal with in terms from our customers and from your constituents, this type of event, and in MedEd's territory here, much of our circuit, and particularly the backbone, is back in the right-of-way. It's off the roads. It's out of sight. And from a customer's perception, we're a few days into this event, and they're wondering, where is MedEd? Well, MedEd's up in the hills. MedEd's back in the woods. And that wasn't so much a restoration effort or challenge for restoration, but it was more of a public relations challenge for all of us. Okay. With that event, if you look across all of MedEd, our restoration, 4 days into the event, we had restored 277,000 customers. So from a 100,000 foot view, we feel like we're doing a good job. Major event, near Sandy level of event, but when you look at Pike and Monroe counties, where most of the damage was, at that same time frame, we'd only restored about 32% of the customers, or about 24,000 customers. So hence the frustration of what customers had gone through here. Complete restoration was finished up on Sunday, March 11th. So that was a full week and 2 days after the event started on Friday. I would like to just take a minute and talk about the May 15th event, because there's some aspects of that event that underscore and reinforce some of the points that I made on the first event. As we talked about, the May 15th event was after several days of ground drenching rain, which, as we know, that makes the trees very susceptible to falling over. The difference in the event for us on this one was that 73% of the customers out on this event were concentrated right here. We had 112,000 customers affected. 81,000 of them were right here in Monroe and Pike counties. Although the percentage of customers affected in those events were slightly more beneficial to Pike, 55% of the Pike customers were affected by that. And again, Monroe was hit hard with 81% of the customers. But with this type of event being very localized and to a degree the amount of damage was less, our ability to restore customers was significantly better. And it's interesting to point out that there were actually 6,000 more customers affected in the May event, than the March event. Yet we were able to restore customers in about 5 days. And the reason I make that point is that just demonstrates how much the nature of how the event unfolds and impacts us and may or may not prevent our ability to prepare and bring in additional resources up front, how much that affects the process, and how much, to the extent that the damage is widespread across our territory in the region. Both of those were non-factors in this event, and as a result, our restoration times were much better for a slightly larger amount of customers. So with that said, that was a quick review, and I'll just, a couple comments to close out here. We at MedEd and First Energy recognize, and we are truly sensitive to the reliability issues and to what the customers have experienced in these two counties up here. We continue, and we have and will maintain both Pike and Monroe counties as a major focus in our infrastructure improvement plan. You heard it referenced by Vice Chairman Place as the LTIP. That will continue to be this area will continue to be a major focus of our spend in that program, as well as our enhanced vegetation management programs. And I'll just give you two factors to demonstrate that for 2018. Pike and Monroe counties represent 7% of MedEd's customers. For 2018, 25% of our long-term infrastructure improvement program was focused on and dedicated to Pike and Monroe counties. And I just make that point to show you that we recognize that we have work to do here, and we're moving funds where they're needed the most. The same is true for our enhanced vegetation management or tree work. Similar there, the enhanced program, which is above and beyond our filed tree trimming program every year with the Utility Commission, for regular maintenance. The enhanced program is designed to take care of all overhangs, vertical, ground to sky, rather than just trimming back a certain number of feet from the conductor. So we go to greater lengths to make sure ground to sky, there's nothing hanging out over that could just fall. In addition, a greater spend on identifying priority trees within the right-of-way. There are trees that we look at, they look like they're healthy trees. We have our forest specialists look at them and make a judgment call. Is that tree more likely than not to come over? Which, as we said earlier, that's the problem, healthy trees coming over. And then lastly, part of the enhanced vegetation management is to actually mow the right-of-ways, to make it much more accessible in emergency situations for our crews to get back in there. Going forward, our focus in these projects, just to give you a sense of where we know our challenges are and what we're focusing on to drive improvement in, is these programs are focused on equipment upgrades, circuit rehabilitation, replacing aging infrastructure. That's one. Two, installing new circuit ties or loops that, with automated switching, allow us to, from our distribution control center, to automatically, without rolling a truck, sectionalize or disconnect the bad portion of the line and reconfigure it and energize and bring a portion, sometimes most, of those customers back on much quicker than you can without that type of automation. Otherwise, it requires a serviceman to come out, a one-man crew to come out, locate the problem, figure out what kind of crew we need, then send a line crew out, 3-4 men, call them in, what have you. That's a tremendous improvement in our ability to reconfigure and restore customers quickly. And then lastly, well, two more pieces that we mentioned. We will be completing our smart meter implementation next year, or very near to it, and we are looking at all of the advantages that come with that in terms of quickly identifying, because those meters will, I think the phrase was used, last gasp. The meter will tell you when it's going down, so we'll know quicker if we have a customer outage. It doesn't take someone to call us and tell us that their power's out. And then on the back end, it's a very powerful tool, because at the end of an event like that, when many customers have called in multiple times, and we are dispatching orders to crews to go out, that's a truck roll that may not be necessary because the power is already back on. So the ability to ping those meters and determine where the lights are back on, eliminating unnecessary truck rolls and allowing us to put those trucks where they're truly needed. So part of our plan going forward is that leveraging that technology to its fullest too, and it truly does. It does shorten the length of a storm because you're more efficient of use of resources there at the end. And then lastly, the increased commitment to our vegetation spend in this area. And I failed to mention earlier, one fact I wanted to give you to reassure our commitment was typically the forestry spend in Pike and Monroe County has been running around $800,000 a year. We nearly tripled it in 2018 in recognition of the challenge here to about $2.3 million. So that concludes my testimony, and I'd be more than happy to answer any questions that I can.
Thank you. Very comprehensive. Dave, number 2.
My name is David Quire. I'm the Director of Operations for PPL Electric Utilities. I work in Allentown, Pennsylvania out of our operating center. We appreciate the opportunity to come here and talk about the impacts that the storm had, the preparations that we made for it, but most importantly, the lessons that we learned from it and what we're doing differently because of it. So thank you, Chairman, and to the committee for having us. With that said, some of the impacts from the storm, as mentioned already, it was predominantly tree-related outages. We did run into issues with blocked roads and inability and inaccessibility to quickly get to the scene to where to restore power. With that said, the storm affected us on Friday. This was Storm Riley. We have 1.4 million customers. Over 260,000 of our customers were affected by this storm. In Monroe County, we have over 68,000 customers, and 48,000 were affected by the storm. So this was an area that was hit, and it was widespread, and we'd like to acknowledge the damage that did occur in this county and how bad that damage was. With that said, when we tally this storm up with all of our storms in our PPL history, it is our 9th worst ever. We did see wind speeds that reached this Hurricane Sandy territory, and so we did compare a lot of the restoration efforts as well as the customers affected to that Hurricane Sandy storm. With that said, we did prepare several days before the storm with ramping up our resources. We requested assistance from other utilities. We did receive that assistance. They began to arrive in our territory on the first day that the storm hit. We received assistance from 12 different states as far as Texas, and that was both for tree crews and line crews. With that, aside from the storm response itself, we do work year-round to harden our system, to limit the impact to storms such as this, so we can compare ourselves to the same impacts that we had in Hurricane Sandy. Transmission-related outages in Hurricane Sandy were 13 outages, which affected it had essentially over 57 million customer minutes lost that we quantify that by. In this storm, we had 2 transmission outages compared to 13 in Hurricane Sandy. So we are seeing the benefits of the investments that we're putting into the reliability of our system. When it came to the response, when you compare the response to what our typical response would be to a smaller thunderstorm, we have essentially about 400 linemen, 1,900 total employees that we devote to our storm work. We had ramped that up from 400 linemen up to 1,900 and 3,000 total resources that were working related to the storm. So we essentially more than tripled our staff of linemen due to the assistance that we received from other areas. With that, we did staff a PPL representative in the Monroe County EMA, and we're thankful for the collaboration that we had there, so that we had the face-to-face contact of ongoing issues that occurred so that we could respond to them quickly. When it comes to a question that had been brought up earlier about our priority of restoration in these storms, and the way that we prioritize that is we essentially, any 911 emergent issues that come up are our first priority. So down conductors, entrapments, fire calls, things such as that are our first priority. Then underneath that, we'll put our transmission, our bulk related, the outages that could threaten the stability of the bulk electric system are also in our top tier of priorities. Once you get under that urgent layer, then we prioritize based off vital facilities, hospitals, 911 centers, wastewater treatment facilities, and things such as that, which we call that class vital facilities that get a priority of restoration. Underneath those, we then initially we respond based off customer counts. So we call them cases of trouble. If a case of trouble has say 2,000 customers as compared to another that has 20, we're going to dispatch to the case that has 2,000, and then we'll work our way down throughout that method throughout the storm. So with that said, on Friday of the storm, when it first hit, we did suppress our notice to customers of when we expected them to be restored. That is so that we don't give inaccurate information that a customer would plan on. But within 24 hours, we did give an area estimated return time of Wednesday, March 7th of that week. We did restore the large majority of customers by that estimated restoration time. What often happens in between those is obviously customers are getting restored in between those days, is once we have a field presence on scene, our on-site linemen will then update that estimate of restore time so that customers have a better idea of when they're going to be back in power. And what did complicate efforts and did extend some of the outages from Wednesday, March 7th into Friday was when Storm Quinn hit on Wednesday with it was over 10 inches of snow in this area and more winds. And what it did increase the customer counts, and it did hinder the initial restoration to get everyone back by that Wednesday. But all of the customers affected from the first storm were restored by Friday. So with that said, moving on to the lessons that we've learned from those two storms in March was essentially three things. So first, we agree that more and better coordination is needed. We're definitely open to further coordination with the counties, with the local municipalities and fire departments and police departments, as well as other utilities such as the telecom companies. And so we definitely do want to voice that we are supportive of that, and we look to make ourselves more and more available to work as a team during those times. The second lesson learned was we're thankful to have been asked to help other states and utilities when they've got hit with hurricanes and severe storms. We've gone down to Florida several times in the past few years. We've been in Virginia recently, and we reflect on how we're treated when we go to those other states. They basically look at us, they say, hey, you're PPL, you know what you're doing, we're gonna afford you the opportunities to work under your safety rules, your permanent tag rules, how you deal with your operations, and we're given autonomy in those storms. They'll often give us an area. They'll say, you know, this is kind of your area for PPL to restore, and we work under our own methods. Historically, when we ask other utilities and contractors to come on our system, we do give them, we have high expectations of them to work as we work. And what we're realizing is it really helps in a storm of these magnitudes to give them more autonomy. To say, hey, you're Alabama Power and you're a lineman from a utility in Texas. We trust you to have the work under safe work methods, and we're looking to give more autonomy to those contractors so that they can be more efficient, and so that it reduces our onboarding time, and it really maximizes their efficiency, and that's feedback that we've gotten from them. The third thing that we've challenged ourselves with is historically. Obviously, when a storm hits and customers that are out of power, the actual restoration of that power is key, and that's what gets all the focus. What has gotten a secondary focus is our assessment of the damage. And so in the storms that were in March, it took us about a day or two to get a good amount of the damage assessed, just to be able to see, get eyes on the jobs out there, so that when a lineman does show up, that those linemen show up with the right materials, they know exactly what they're getting into, they have a picture of the job before they're dispatched to it. So we're challenging ourselves to now assess in a matter of hours instead of a matter of days, and putting as much emphasis on preparing for the assessment of those damages as well as the restoration. So we're really engaging our general office, our headquarters employees, that may not be as much, not be able to contribute as much to the restoration, but they can be eyes on the ground, and we're taking different strategies when it comes to our assessing. So that concludes our testimony, and we welcome questions and comments to that.
Thank you all four gentlemen. It's very helpful to have this insight. You know, it's easy as a customer for us to call and scream and hope that somebody's there yesterday to repair things. If not, then we call the local politicians. So if you don't get enough call from the constituents, then we give you lots of calls. And if you don't call us, then we call the PUC. And then we can't understand why you're not out fixing lines because you're so busy answering our phone calls. So this is very helpful, and then I think the fact that you're doing some self-retrospection is always helpful. We did those kind of incident command things in my prior commitment. I believe we have questions starting to my far left, Representative Coffer and Representative Fritz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I wanted to ask the Vice Chairman, in your testimony on pages 5 and 6, you alluded to failed benchmarks. I'm wondering if that leads to fines, or what I know that it says that there's been a plan put in place to these RIPs, the Reliability Improvement Plans. Are there fines associated with that, or just new planning? What exactly is that process?
Yeah, ultimately, it's gradations towards you either resolve the issues to our satisfaction, or ultimately could lead clearly to fines and penalties.
When do fines kick in? Because I'm looking at, you're referring to one here where there seems to be all 4 rolling 12-month quarters in 2017 failed, another 2/3 of 4 quarters, another failure for reliability. I'm wondering, at one point, do these kick in? Is it after a year? Is it after 2 consecutive quarters? Or is it just depending on the specific circumstance?
I suspect it's specific to the circumstance. Dan might have a better impression than I do on that as well, but my role is adjudicatory. I'm at the end of that string.
Gotcha.
But yeah, certainly, as I said, it's a stepwise effort that Dan can elaborate on, I think.
Yeah, so it is specific. So in this instance, the 4 First Energy companies are all under reliability improvement plans, and those were 3-year plans, with 2018 as the kind of the linchpin year. So we're looking at we're monitoring their performance each 12-month rolling quarter. So again, with the Vice Chairman here, I don't want to prejudge anything, but so yeah, you're right. At some point, yes, it becomes okay enough.
But it's based on how well they're adapting to following the plan. They still might miss the benchmark, but have made significant improvement. Those types of things are taken into
Correct. Yeah.
account.
So we give everybody a fair shot to correct their actions, and then at some point, it's okay. This isn't working. We got to take the next step.
Thank you. And I want to shift over to the other 2, if possible. Are your lines insured? Typically, are your lines insured by an insurance company, or how does that typically work for you guys as an industry?
I will say that, so if there's damage to our lines and damage such as this, we do that, it comes out of, we budget for storms and these types of repairs. Unfortunately, being in operations, I'm not as familiar with the liabilities and insurance aspects, but when our lines are damaged and in situations like this is part of our budget to restore the lines and repair them.
In addition to that, we also have MEDED has a storm rider that helps offset some of the expense of these storms. It's built right into our recovery rates. But in addition to that, in major events where you may have a $20, $35 million type of event that significantly impacts all electric utilities, there are recovery mechanisms over time.
Yeah, I would imagine obviously you have to have a budget for this type of stuff. I
Yes.
get that. But what my concern is, why I asked that question, is because we heard from previous testimony that there were issues with responses for preventative maintenance. And so if the lines are insured, I get the idea of, as a company, we'll wait for something to actually happen before we respond, because then we can bill insurance to get recovery for it. So, you know, that's my concern, and I don't know the answer to that. I see some people shaking their heads. Maybe they can answer if possible. But my concern is, if we have local township supervisors or through their EMA directors saying, we have a problem tree, this tree is going to fall over, it's a dead tree, and they're contacting our utilities and there isn't a response coming from it, that's concerning to me. That's concerning to say that we're not going to act on that. And so I'm going to take at face value what the township supervisor said, that it's an ongoing issue in regard to this response for preventative maintenance, that nothing will happen until the tree actually falls. It's his experience, and I'm not sure how long he said he's been serving as a township supervisor, but that's concerning to me. So
Well, I think I can shed some additional light on how the process works. Our forestry and maintenance programs are driven on a cycle where we go around and we address 100% of our trees every 4 years. We have a 5-year maintenance cycle for distribution, for infrastructure. But in addition to that, our engineering team, our reliability teams are looking at all of our circuits in terms of overall reliability, and their performance is measured from best to worst. And our worst performing circuits are a certain percentage of, the bottom tier, if you will. Significant resources are dedicated to those circuits to try to continue to keep the same circuits from reoccurring on that list year over year. So it's not a situation where it matters if it's insured or not. There are proactive programs trying to achieve reliability goals by managing those worst type of circuits.
Please.
It is similar for us when it comes to the maintenance cycle. So essentially, on what we call our 3-phase backbone, we look to trim 25 feet on either side of that circuit. On single phase, which is more in your rural area, it's 15 feet. So there is an ongoing maintenance cycle where we ensure that those cycles are completed. Now, if we receive a report that a tree is on a wire but customers are still in power, what we'll create is what's called a power service problem. We give ourselves 3 days to respond to those issues. And so if there's specific examples that we can take as feedback, I'd really appreciate taking those back so that we can learn if we have gaps in the process, but we do have processes set up to account for that.
Well, and I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. I wanted to make sure I address your question. I'm unaware if you're getting at the question of perverse incentives.
That's exactly what I'm getting at.
Yeah. I'm unaware of there's perverse incentives. I think it's been stated here. They have properly aligned incentives with reliability metrics, particularly if you take a good look at the granularity in here. Imperfect as metrics always are. I think we've got a good handle in the Commonwealth of setting benchmarks where they need to be to ensure reliability and addressing the specific needs of trouble circuits. So,
well, I guess my only suggestion too, coming out of those couple of questions I asked, and this is my last comment, Mr. Chairman, is just that it sounds like we can do some coordination, at least with our local township supervisors, our mayors, our EMA directors, that if they're finding these problem trees or these that what they're identifying, at least to get some level of response, because it seems like they're trying to kick it up and they're not getting an answer. I mean, to hear nothing back is pretty frustrating as an elected official who you're responsible to take care of your area, no matter whatever that is. So if we can put whoever the person is who might be responsible for your 4-year plan and your 25-foot tree trimming plans, to put them in contact with somebody who might be the roadmaster for the township, and be able to have that contact person say, listen, we've identified this tree's dead, it's starting to fall over, this is going to be a problem tree, and before we reach the point of disaster, if we can take care of that ahead of time. So it sounds like there's some coordinated effort that we can do to some degree to work directly with our municipalities to work on that effort. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Coffer. We'll follow up with Representative Fritz, Representative Rosemary Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't want to be the kind of guy that wears out my welcome by asking two questions, so I'm going to ask a two-part question. Dave,
And I'm happy to bifurcate it further.
Dave and Dave, do you find that the tree versus line impact that causes disruption, is that mainly on road sign poles, or is it midstream poles that I would perhaps refer to as a power line?
Excuse me, when you say midstream poles?
Well, Dave, you mentioned that sometimes your crew is working up in the woods, so I would fathom that's a power line. That's
Yes, yes.
Okay.
So essentially, what we consider those inaccessible lines, yes, those inaccessible lines do present more challenges to us,
Okay.
especially in a storm such as this because of the snow. Also, just to get to them when a tree does come down on a line. So we do look to either reduce or eliminate our inaccessible lines in areas. I'm familiar with some lines in this area that we're looking to make from inaccessible to accessible, and that would involve moving them to roadways where possible.
Okay. Dave?
Yeah, and I want to add that it's also heavily dependent upon the terrain because, you know, the rain, the trees are on the side of a hill, and as it rains in the ground, you know, things just naturally work their way downhill and tend to lean. And that's a factor in both cross-country or, you know, right along the roadway. Typically, you'll see the roads cut right out of the hillside, and if you look to the right, it's a pretty steep incline. And the problems are that you'll have one tree out of our reach, a healthy tree that'll fall, it'll cascade. So
I fathom as such. Have any of your engineers perhaps considered a prototype or a shield for a pole? And just one concept that I fathom would be having an arm at a 45-degree angle with a piece of braided wire. Okay, that would be a guard for your wire, so if a tree does fall down onto the pole, it lands on top of this braided wire or protective shield as opposed to landing on the wire itself. So just a thought that I'm putting out there that perhaps there's a way to mitigate those tree versus wire impacts.
Well, the majority of the exposure is not necessarily pole contact. You have much greater distances that are nothing but three-phase conductor, large aluminum or copper conductors that are strong. And the tree falls on that line, and the entire weight of that tree just will pull the pole over by its connections to the conductors.
Okay.
And I will say we have begun to pilot. It's a vendor called Hendrix Cable, which is similar to what you described. They've just got to the patent first, I
Do we
guess.
call that the Fritz cable?
I'm sorry. And what it is essentially it involves we consider it part of our storm hardening package. So it's thicker poles, and it's a wire that is in. You can see it driving at times in this area. It's a triangle pattern, and it can bear the weight of small to mid-sized trees. The question had come up earlier about underground, why don't we stick everything underground? And one of the answers to that is if you took our distribution system and spread it around the world, it would go around the world more than twice. And so you can imagine the cost of putting that underground. Whereas what we try to do is where cost is prohibitive, that's somewhat of the middle ground that we'll look to put in is that storm hardening type cable and pole set so that it does increase the reliability of those circuits.
And if I may add, Dave is right. That type of almost bundled or grouped conductors, it is stronger to a degree. It'll hold up. It will not come apart like a bare aluminum conductor will, and it'll withstand maybe a limb coming over and laying on it much better. But it's also more robust. It's got a steel carrier that holds it up. So if you have a large tree that falls on that, that is going to, and those are typically bolted to the top of the pole. That'll break a pole in half just as quickly as anything else. So there are applications that make a difference, but it's certainly not a complete answer.
Yeah, and if I may just 30 seconds jump in. I mean, the Hendrix cable, I think has got clear applicability, but it's costly. So we do expect our utilities, and I think all of us would expect our utilities to make a risk-based analysis of cost-benefit in what we do. Continuing challenge, particularly given the trees and the geography of the Commonwealth.
With that in mind, should you not have that expectation and you decide to go the Cadillac model, I suspect none of us would see any difference in our prices for our energy, correct?
Do you want the snarky answer or the actual?
But I think I obviously deliberately mentioned that because I think we have to decide what it is that we are willing to pay for. You know, oftentimes we dial 911. We want the police officer there 5 minutes ago. We want the EMS guy there 5 minutes ago. I have friends of mine who want to be able to shoot deer off the back of the porch, but then when they want the mail delivered right to the porch, and they want the EMS to be able to get there right away, but we're not allowed to snow because they want to put snowmobiles out in December, January, February. So, as customers, I think we have to think about that. And in a moment, I'm going to ask you a question on the safety issue, but I appreciate your delineating that there is a significant cost factor that as customers, we will ultimately pay all that. So, thank you. Rosemary Brown, and then Representative Scavello. Pardon me. Well,
Senator.
now that we have Senator Hahn, Representative Scavello will follow. Thank you for being good spirit there, Mario.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for your testimony. So, Dave, PP&L, you discussed the investments that you've made and even with the assessment piece of it. So, do you already have that loop system in place that with the circuits?
Sure. So we essentially we have this area completely penetrated with smart grid devices.
Okay.
What our aim is to sectionalize the system into 500 customer chunks, so that when a tree comes down, instead of 2,000 customers get affected, ideally it'd be 500. Our next wave of technology coming out in this area will be new meters. That has begun already, and that will commence about mid next year. And that will be the completing piece to having a fully automated grid in this area.
Okay, good to know. And I think Dave from MedEd, when you mentioned, and I'm doing this basically for anybody who's watching the testimony, because with the LTIP and with some of that information that was presented and the reliability and what we're really looking at today, you mentioned 7% of the MedEd customers are Pike in Monroe County,
Yes.
right? And so 20% of the infrastructure dollars improvements, if I'm getting this right, is being spent in these two counties.
Yes, 25%.
25%.
Yes.
So is that for 2017? That was 2017? 18?
That's been since the initiation of the LTIP program, which began in 16.
Okay.
So that's about 2.5 years.
Okay, and so that will, right, so we're almost out of the 2.5 years. I know this morning we were with Scott from MedEd, and he rattled off some very interesting numbers, but I just wanted to make sure that the people that are watching understand that the enhancements and the dollars that are coming to Monroe and Pike County for MedEd on the technology is being, dedicated. So I just want to make sure if there's any additional numbers you might want to add on.
The number, I will mention again, the enhanced forestry spend is the same magnitude, 25% of that budget. But this ties back to what I was speaking to with Representative Coffer earlier, that the reason these funds are dedicated as heavily as they are to Pike and Monroe County, as you might expect, a large percentage of our worst performing circuits are in this area. So, and then the Pennsylvania, there was a Pennsylvania management audit that was done, and as part of that Pennsylvania management audit in 2014, there were commitments made to address worst performing circuits, and those commitments were rolled right into the LTIP program as well.
Okay.
So this is that reliability management and prioritizing at work. And it is 25% of those funds across both programs are dedicated here, and we will see similar dedication going forward.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For everybody out there, Representative Benninghoff and myself shared an office together for many years, so we're good friends. I'm gonna ask some unique things, okay? And because I think of where you are when, let's say, for example, PPL is on one side of the street, MedEd's on the other side of the street. PPL is okay, MedEd is out. And the MedEd piece, the line is coming from the woods. And in one particular case, it's a shopping center in Bartonsville. And when it's out, it's always out for a period of time, a long period of time, with a hotel nearby, which is right off the highway, and people are stranded. That hotel could really help a lot. So my question is, can we put some agreements together so that if in those particular cases that you guys can just like flip a switch or do something that take the power from, let's say, PPL or reciprocate back the other way?
That is a possibility. we haven't spoken specifically, Dave and I, about this, but what you're referring to is a tie between PPL and
Mhm.
Med Ed. I mean, there are existing ties around our system with other utilities, so yes, Senator, that is a possibility.
I think in this particular case, when that goes down, and that shopping center goes down, a lot of money. It's a big, huge supermarket, food and all, and there's a lot of jobs there. It's a pretty big shopping center. So if we can work that out, I think it really would help. And it's right in the center, a hub of the county.
Yeah, and I must qualify that. Obviously, we have to, do an engineering analysis on that, see if it makes sense. But it's definitely, a plausible idea.
As far as makes sense in what way?
Well, I guess depending on where the circuits are located, is it possible? Are they right next to each other?
Right across
are there
the street.
Is there substation capacity either direction for PPL to support load on Med Ed circuit, vice versa?
I'll follow this up with a comment, because when they were putting that shopping center, they knew about the problems that would happen there.
Okay.
And they wanted, PPL would have taken them on. Unfortunately, it's in a different service area. So I'm saying it does. Evidently, it's there. So if we can look at that, another location, and I know that Representative Rader made the comment, and you made the comment as well, underground. What is the cost to the user? What is the added cost to the user on their utility bills? Maybe Andrew, you might be able to answer that, because people think it's free. You know what I'm saying? You're going to have it underground or you have it above ground. From what I'm told, even if you went underground, you're going to have major problems anyway, because that line's going to go out somewhere. It's not going to stay underground throughout the whole thing. Secondly, the property owner would have to pay for a hookup, because now the line is coming from the ground and not from the air. So that's another added expense. But typically, what would be the number? 7 times, 10 times more in cost in electricity?
Pennsylvania hasn't done a study. Lots of other states, and I know DC did recently. It's about like $1 million a mile undergrounding, as compared to 100,000. Yeah, so it's substantial.
In a paved area now? I'm not talking about a rural area. Paved area, sidewalk, streets.
Well, then you could, depending on the municipality, you could be adding more costs. We certainly experience that with our
because I've
gas
got one borough that I know
water
keeps calling one of the utilities there and thinking that it's a minor expense, and it's definitely not.
It could be substantial, and there, again, it comes, like the Vice Chairman's cost benefit. There could be areas where you do strategic undergrounding based on, they'll have to do some engineering studies on their own. But so it's not out of the question, but it's, as an overall panacea, it gets a little expensive.
And here's where I'm going to come back with the same question. You're sharing, in some places, you're in the same property, in the same building, Med Ed and PPL. If PPL is back, can we have that connectivity again, so that to help those residents within that borough, you almost like flip a switch and temporarily give them power. And I think that, and I'd appreciate if the Utility Commission can get in and make that happen if that's possible. I don't, because there's a tremendous amount of business. It's a county seat. When it goes down, all the county offices are out, the courthouse. So just to have that as a backup, I think would be phenomenal. The poles are there. You got the Med Ed and PPL. It's one of those unique experiences only in the borough, rather than go and spend a tremendous amount of money to put wires on the ground.
So if I may, to address a couple of the points, Senator, in reference to going underground, and you touched on it, just because a conductor or a circuit is underground, ultimately that circuit is fed from an overhead line somewhere, out of a substation with a right-of-way running over Hill and Dell, facing all of the same reliability risk that it would, regardless if it was overhead or underground. Additionally, what doesn't come to mind right away is when you talk about underground cable does fail. And you can have, lightning events that hit the overhead lines and it blows cables apart underground. It takes a tremendously longer time to repair underground cables than it does overhead cables. So I'm just saying that that's a factor. And then in terms of cost to the customers or the constituents, it's not just an adder to their electric bill. They're going to have to pay an electrician, whatever it may be, several hundred dollars, et
That's
cetera.
just to come to the house.
Well, no, I just meant to reconfigure. You know,
Yeah.
it's coming in overhead through
Yeah.
a mast, and now it's going to come underground to
Yeah.
a meter base that goes down in a basement. So there are, you know, legitimate concerns there in terms of the impact on the customers.
And just one last comment. And I know that Chuck is back there. If I've called a utility company on a tree, I've never had a problem with PPL or MedEd, but I have had problems when we call Verizon. Verizon is who always says, unless it cuts their line, unless there's no service, that's when they come out. Now, but PPL and MedEd, every time we've called, you know, they've gone out, especially if our office is called. I want to thank all of you, and Commissioner, I think that's so important if we can make that a possibility, and not just here in this county, but anywhere else where there's you know, you've got lines from two different companies near each other, and one is okay and the other one's not. We should take advantage of that, because I think for us anyway, to get power back to our constituencies and is quicker is what it's all about.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Representative Scavello, I'm sorry. Representative Saccone, and Representative Toohill, and Representative Doyle Heffley.
Thank you. You mentioned mowing and clearing of the right-of-ways. I had the opportunity to talk to a contractor that did mowing of some right-of-ways, and he mentioned that there was a cutback in the mowing to save money. How often do you have contractors mowing, clearing right-of-ways? Is it once a year? Is it every other year now? Has it changed at all? And the other part of that question is you mentioned about linemen, getting more linemen on board. On another committee, we had talked about a lineman shortage in Pennsylvania. Are you experiencing that? And where are you finding these? You said you were ramping up the number of linemen. Where are you finding them?
I'll take the lineman question first. So essentially, we employ our own linemen. The local unions that we contract work out with, even just normal work, they do have full work for their union. And so there is more movement amongst local union linemen in our area. With that said, we simply continue to expand the circle. So we've taken, for this storm as far as Texas, for other storms, we've taken from Hydro-Quebec in Canada. And so essentially, it involves more preparation, but we'll just keep going and expanding that circle until we get the resources that we need. But it is true that the local lineman unions do have full employment right now, which is great for them. And to your first question related to
mowing,
the mowing. So it varies based off the territory. We try to use data to track how fast vegetation grows in certain areas over another, because we go down touching the Maryland border up towards New York State, and the profile of vegetation is different. On average, it's about a 5-year clear cycle. But what we've done in recent years is we've expanded the right of way where we can. So that 15 feet and 25 feet that I mentioned earlier, as well as we also call it ground to sky, we trim essentially just from 15 feet out and 15 feet out, completely everything up into the sky is cleared. And that is it varies, but I'd say on an average a 5-year cycle.
So that's for tree trimming. What about you're actually doing mowing of some of these right-of-ways, right?
For transmission right-of-ways, yes, we also clear underneath, either mowing or spraying.
And how often is that done?
I don't want to misspeak. I'd like to follow up with that question if I can.
Because I noticed it used to be once a year, and he was saying the contract that I talked to said it moved to once every other year.
Okay.
Some of these, I just wondered.
I'll need to confirm that.
I'm going to share that with us later on, and we'll disperse the information to this committee. Thank you.
And I will add that that's also dependent on the practices, because there's either mowing or there's use of herbicides. And herbicides will prevent, the idea of herbicides is to eliminate the need to mow. So it is, I can't give you a definite specific answer either. It requires, yearly assessment, growth rates. We may not see a right away for 4 years. And when we're planning to do the work, for the next cycle of that, if the herbicides have been effective, There may have been intra-cycle application of herbicides, and that may continue to prevent the need to mow even on cycle. So it's a bit of a moving target depending on the growth rates and the use of herbicides. In response to your inquiry about linemen, Med-Ed is aggressively, we're training linemen through what we call our Power Systems Institute, where we partner with local community colleges, and we essentially, the future employees will earn a 2-year degree in essentially utility electrical technology. While they're doing that, they're going through an apprenticeship program. They're at our training centers on our property. 2 years later, we hire them as an apprentice. We need more linemen now, and what's largely driving that is two things. The amount of attrition that's on the horizon with retirements, and then also our investment and commitment to the LTIP programs. We see, we plan to take a path similar to what PPL has done. They're a few years ahead of us, but we see the obvious advantages of that program, and we're going to continue to build and do more work through that program. And it makes all the sense in the world to ultimately hire linemen, have employees that are available 24/7 for storm type events and emergency outages. So yeah, is there a lineman shortage? I would say that we need linemen, and those are the two reasons why, because the amount of work we're doing is growing and because of attrition.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is for the Vice Chairman, Mr. Place. I'll put it all into one big question. Are there federal stimulus monies that are coming to Pennsylvania that the PUC is then going to be able to dole out? I was told that there was going to be some amount of federal stimulus money coming from the federal government. And then are you able to control what the individual utility companies use it towards? Like, can you say there needs to be more of this money spent, or a certain portion of that stimulus money spent on these types of preventative measures?
I'm not aware.
Okay.
But I will certainly make sure I check all the corners and get back and respond to the complete committee on both your questions.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a two-part. One is obviously we all heard from the local emergency responders in the area about communicating when they, trying to form better lines of communication in those emergency events. When you have lines down, they're trying to clear the roads. So I would, encourage Med-Ed and PPL to work with those local responders here in Monroe County and across the region. Obviously, there seems to have been a breakdown in this last event, whatever that is. I would just encourage, taking steps to make that communication a little bit better. And then the second part, you had said, Dave, you had said in your testimony, Dave, is it Choir? About the standards that your linemen, the PPL linemen, use when going out to do a job, and when you go to Florida, you use those standards. Now, when other companies come in to help you, you're more or less requiring them to use your standards. Now, are those state standards, are those company standards, are there uniform standards, or what? Is there something that we can do to help in that manner so you can get more people to come in when we need them?
Sure, great question. They are company standards. They're essentially our permanent and tagging. So it's what linemen need to ensure that they're working under safe conditions before they start work. Other utilities, because of the nature of their geography all around the country, do have different standards for different reasons that often are tailored to their area. So there is not one that's consistent across all utility companies. And so what we have done in the past is we have onboarding, and it's essentially when linemen first arrive from out of state, we'll onboard them for basically a first shift so that they're familiar with our practices, and then they're in touch with our operations group. What we're really looking to do is we may not extend that to everyone that comes onto our system, but when we're receiving resources from a trusted public utility, then we do plan to extend that same autonomy to them. and not have to go through all of the onboarding. So there isn't consistent standards. We're not going to assign it to everybody, but there is advantage and efficiencies in doing it.
And those are primarily your internal standards?
That is
Those
correct.
aren't the state regulations or anything like that?
No.
Okay, thank you.
We do require all electric distribution companies to operate under the National Electric Safety Code, and then they're all beholden to OSHA like everybody. Yes.
Thank you. And Dave, I just wanted to thank you talking about the schools, because I know someone that's attending the school now. And, I think that's a great thing that they're partnering with the community colleges, because we keep hearing, we need more truck drivers, we need more linemen, and we want to make sure that education's out there for them. And, thank you to the companies for helping supply that and giving them that opportunity. Also, I know you're saying you're doing the programs for Monroe and Pike, but don't forget Northampton. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask for Northampton County as well, because we've had similar issues. And I think one of the things that we saw in the last storm, and I think this goes back to communication, your people come out and on the truck and they say, broken, we have to replace the pole, this whole area's out in the borough, you can't do anything about it, you have to get someone else. So we actually had a mayor who stopped the truck, made them go up, and said, one of the councilmen said, it's only this breaker. And if you put that back, the community has the power until you can straighten out the pole. And they did that, but, I don't want people out there stopping trucks on the street and making them go to a certain area. So I think that communication thing is so important for everyone, so that they have numbers, the mayors or the EMA or whoever has those numbers. Now, I usually give them Senator Scavello's cell phone number, and then they get to call. But I think if they have contacts, and those meetings that you have, those telephone meetings are so helpful, because they can get on there and explain things and work with that. So I want to thank you for doing that. But I just think it's important that sometimes they don't see the people who are out there and they're linemen, and I know they're tired or whatever, but they might be able to solve a problem for 300 people if they just took the time to go that extra mile and put the breaker back. So, and then one other thing, if you are out and you're out for a number of days, do you want them to keep calling? Because do you know if they're out? I've had people say to me, well, I've called, the truck's out, they do something, power's on for 10 seconds, the truck leaves, my power's out. I call back and they say, no, we've just been there, you have power. And they're like, no, we're sitting in the dark, we don't have power. So, do they need to keep calling and clogging your lines and your customer service people? Like, do they need to do that? And, what's the response time for the second call then?
Well, I'll answer that from two perspectives. From the utility perspective, once you call, we log your call. Your outage gets rolled up into a predictive process to identify the device that's out. So that's adequate. That should cover it. But as a customer and a homeowner with my family, when we've been out of power the few times that we have, I think about every other day. I just make sure that they're hearing from me. I don't believe that that's absolutely necessary, but from my perspective, I would call again, but again, that's a
But
personal.
I mean, when the truck has been there, so they've had power for 10 seconds or a minute or whatever, the truck leaves because he thinks he's done the job, right? The power's back on. They go away, but now the customer's calling in saying, I'm out of power. The customer care center is saying, oh no, we've responded, it's back on. And the customer's like, no, we're out again. So do they get back? Do they have to go to the bottom of the list, or are they going to get back up that the truck's only 2 miles down the road? Can they get sent back?
In that case, and I apologize, I misunderstood your question. Absolutely, call back in, because that process is being managed through our outage management system. People are about to close that out. We get that call. That outage is still on the board. It's still on that crew's computer, and that pops back up as still active. They will turn around and come back to that.
Okay, because I think that was something we were seeing, because the care centers are saying, the customer care centers are saying, no, you're on, and the customers are saying, no, we're not. And they kind of got into, I had several calls on that. And last, Mr. Chairman, I just want to say also, when you do your cuts, we get complaints as well. So I know you're out and you're trying to be proactive, and we sat through seminars a couple years ago explaining, we're going to have to go through, we have to cut the lines, and we have to make sure that the lines are cut. And then when you do that, people complain because, you come through, you cut their trees down, they don't want it. So sometimes you're always in a no-win situation. But thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for everything that you
Okay.
do.
And
Think-
if I may just share quickly, I appreciate your comments about our PSI program, and I wanted to share some good news regarding the Stroudsburg shop. We've had this year's class that started in September. We've had a bumper crop of apprentices, a bumper crop, if you will. We had five applicants join the program from the Easton Stroudsburg area, and that's good news because their families are here. They've grown up here. If employees join the program and, through the luck of the draw, they end up working somewhere that's far from home, over time they have opportunities through preference moves and bidding on jobs to ultimately go back towards home. We're starting to see that our recruiting efforts are paying off in this area, and it's really evident this year, so that's great news.
And if I may add to your point earlier, it speaks to the difference between analog meters and smart meters. In an old system, an analog meter, yes, you would need to call back in, but the intent and clearly the technology is there for smart meters that if that person's out 10 seconds or 10 minutes later, that smart meter is pinging back that they're out. So there's no longer any question if you're on the phone with them, the service center knows you are out or you are on.
It not only does that, but it also says where they're out. So it's pretty fast. I think Senator Scavella had a 20-word question to ask.
No, it won't be 20-word. I just want to, there was a comment made earlier, and I have to tell you, I look at MedEd's numbers just like I look at everyone else. Until the last couple of years when we had those storms, I thought they were pretty good. Their numbers were pretty good. And I believe that starting in 13 or so, they started to plan to do many improvements. And I did take a look at what they were proposing. And yesterday they had about 20 or so of their people there at the Innovation Center at East Stroudsburg to be there to explain to people exactly what they were doing. And I want to commend them because I thought it was Representative Brown and myself were there for most of the. I was there for the whole thing, and you were there for most of the whole presentation. And any person that came there, any constituent, any MedEd customer received the information that they needed, and I thought it was well done, and I want to thank your company for doing that.
Thank you, Senator.
I guess you can't isolate microphones, but before I have our great host, Jack Rader, close us out, I have two quick questions myself. You had talked about having 45-mile-an-hour winds. I don't think the average person realizes how fast that is, but if you're in a boom truck, you really have a good appreciation for those types of things. How high is the average pole?
Well, the smaller poles are 30 feet. The taller distribution poles are 50, 55 feet. Transmission poles can be 110 feet or even larger.
Right. I mean, I live in a pretty rural area like this, and generally the poles that are breaking, snapping, falling aren't the ones that you can just drive the truck right up to only 10 feet away. They're the ones that are built on the side of a mountain. Oftentimes it's rocky terrain, and or if the terrain's soft enough to drop a tree, then it's not very stable to take a truck in to put out bearings on and those types of things. So I think as constituents, we need to keep all this in mind when we're asking about a power on or wires now. We're not talking about a single thread of wire going. And the ability to put that pole up is significant. So I just wanted to get that out there. Last thing, for us as legislators, if it is an issue for you on state land, and I'm thinking predominantly forestry because they're less likely to want to cut trees and they're overreaching things, we need to know about that. We can put that extra pressure on it. The Game Commission has probably a little more regular basis of monitoring some of their own properties. But any state property that you need assistance, I think these gentlemen up here would be more than glad to help you with that, and I would encourage you to do that. Last but not least, I do want to echo something our good Executive Director Sean Harris reminded me of in the Emergency Preparedness Committee. There is a bill, House Bill 1318, Chairman Barrar is putting together, and that is a complete rewrite of the emergency preparedness rules and laws in the state of Pennsylvania. I know Jack, I believe, is a co-sponsor of that, and we want to encourage people paying attention to that, but Pennsylvania is trying to do some upgrades on that. Without further ado, I want to personally thank you on behalf of the Policy Committee. I want to thank our wonderful technology and video crew. They always make sure they do a good job making us sound good and getting this out to our constituents. For those that can't be here and members that can't be here, will be able to review this as well as the public. And most importantly, thank you to Tobyhanna Township for being gracious hosts. Without further ado, Jack, thank you very much for inviting us to your beautiful community, and we'll let you close us out and adjourn it.
Great, thank you. I want to yield my time to Representative Sankey if you need it any time.
He's
But
soon
if
gonna be,
not,
he's gonna be
I
my
do
new
have a
vice
few
chairman.
questions.
I didn't travel the furthest. I thought it was a good dialogue. I learned a lot, and
I
I'm
was
not going to
just
talk as
teasing.
long as Mario.
I was just teasing. I want my time back. A couple of comments, and I did have those initial questions when I first started out. But I did talk about putting underground. What my implication was, when I was a township supervisor, I was thinking about putting just in front of the township building the wires underground. It was $40,000 or $50,000. I couldn't do it. I realized that it's cost prohibitive to do it everywhere. What my question was, if there are chronic places where maybe the lines are here and the trees are here and you can't get all the trees out of the way, would it be feasible to do chronic areas that you can't really attack any other way? That was my question. And you don't have to answer that if you don't want to, but that was the substance of that question. And talking about weather, I have a weather site that I pay for, and a lot of times I know like a week in advance we might get a really bad storm. Now, if you go to the TV, they don't want to talk about it because they don't want to scare everybody. So I don't know what weather site you use, but maybe you want to look at a site that might give you the real, something that might happen. And I know you don't want to waste money, but maybe you could respond to something that might happen, looking and say, hey, this is the bad storm we had in March. I knew it was going to happen, and I knew days in advance. And I don't know if everybody knew that. And I told people, I was in my post office, a gentleman was going to Strasburg. I said, don't go. Once this changes over to snow, there's going to be a big issue. And he called me the next day and said, you probably saved my life. So if I know some things that might happen, there might be ways where you guys could find out maybe ahead of time that something really bad might happen. And sometimes he's wrong, but sometimes he's right. And there might be a better response time to something like that. I don't know if that's, I don't know what your call-in is at that point when you know bad weather's coming, but maybe you could extend that a little bit so people would be there ahead of time so they would know something might happen. Those are just comments I had. Trying to make it shorter so you don't have to comment on them. Question I had about nothing was touched about overtime. Does overtime enter into your equation at all when there's a bad storm? And do you say, listen, we don't want to pay the overtime, so you guys are going to have to hold off on fixing this until? Does that enter into it at all?
Certainly not.
Okay. Same way, Pete Bell.
Yeah, it's actually the opposite. What we look for is safety. And so the expectation is everyone's working a double shift, and then we'll just monitor and ensure that no one's working to the point that they're going to get into the safety past that.
The only reason I asked that question, one time I had an issue, and the gentleman came out, looked at the line, said we could fix this in 10 minutes, but the company doesn't want to pay overtime, so I can't get them out here. So that's why I asked that question. But if you're not doing that, that's fine.
Yeah, and if the commission was aware of that, our hair would catch on fire.
And talking about the tree trimming again, I still think there could be ways to do a better job with that. The trees I'm looking at, if you just go out, maybe send a guy around, and I know there's some dead trees that I see all the time that are going to be an issue, and they're not taken care of. And I know there could be some better coordination with the townships and the roadmasters. I think they'd be happy to tell you where there might be some issues. I think a lot of people would probably be happy to tell you where there might be some issues, but I don't think we get response to that if we do that. And that definitely would help when we get storms if you were proactive rather than waiting for something to happen and the tree does come down. They're coming down. It's just a question of when. And I think that could be addressed a little bit better. My question too on the right-of-way issue. If there is a bad storm and you have an emergency, can you go outside that right-of-way to take care? You wouldn't want 10,000 people out of power because one person said you can't go outside the right-of-way. Do you have the ability to go outside of that right-of-way during an emergency or not?
It mostly depends. We look to work mostly in our right-of-way. If there is an issue that is extending into the right-of-way, we will absolutely take whatever means necessary in order to restore that line in an emergency. And to prevent the outage if there's hazard trees and things like that. We do work with the landowners and property owners to balance that when it's more proactive.
Right.
But when it comes to emergencies, we do what's necessary in those situations.
Okay, good. I'm glad to hear that. I had some PUC questions here, not to leave you guys out. We were talking, the first panel talked a lot about coordination, and I think townships, I was a township supervisor, I know they're willing to work with the utilities on solving some of these issues, and the police and the fire company. Is there anything you guys can do to mandate that everyone gets together? Or is that something legislatively we would have to do, mandate, or make people get together to try and solve some of these issues? Because I think that would go a really long way to help some of these problems when we have bad storms. And we're all willing to do it, and there's just not that coordination. Can you make there be coordination?
Well, yeah, certainly we could direct companies to attend meetings, things like that. But what we've done in past storms, one of the lessons learned was, for road closures was getting with, they work through the county emergency management, but now I think we need to maybe take the next step and as the Vice Chairman mentioned, we do a post-storm report. All this information we're taking in here and these other meetings, it's all going to go feed into that in terms of our recommendations. So we come out with our recommendations, we follow up the companies to make sure they take action on them. So yeah, that'll be definitely one of them. Will be, okay, you've coordinated with the county on the road closures now. Now you need to take that next step down and coordinate with the township and
Because I think they really are
because
really
there may be a gap there.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a gap between the fire companies, the police, and the townships and the power companies. Because I know I get calls too from different townships. Hey, can you help us out here? They shouldn't have to call me. They should be able to coordinate with the utilities directly, because we all want the roads open. We want the fire company to be able to go out. We want the police to take care of their issues. And I think it could happen a lot faster if there was some kind of communication between everybody and some coordination. And nobody knows better than the townships where the problem areas could be, where the fire companies or local police. They're right there. They know where these issues probably are. And I think it could be solved a lot faster if there was some communication between everybody. And that doesn't take a lot of money. It just takes people to want to talk to each other. And if that would have to come through legislation, I wouldn't mind attacking it that way. But if there's something you guys could do to make that work more efficiently, I think that's really important. I do have a question. If we have the same type of storm again, have we made any improvements so that we won't have the power outage for 4 or 5 days of our vast area? Or could it happen again the same manner in today's world because you really haven't been able to get to the point where you can impact that?
Sure. So just as we did a comparison after Hurricane Sandy, we have done comparisons after this hurricane where we've made the lessons learned that we mentioned we have already completed.
Mm-hmm.
And so we would anticipate that our restoration would be faster. When it comes to the investment in the system, we do have penetration of smart grid in this area.
Yeah, glad to hear that.
So what we're focusing now is on worst performing circuits. So we've identified specific circuits that we're now going to storm harden in the county. And so the answer very simply would be if the same storm happened again, it would be a shorter time and we would anticipate less customers affected.
And my last, I guess, comment would be if you could get my house on board faster. That's all I really care about anyway. Delete that. I do want to thank everybody for coming today. The two panels were great, and I think we got a lot of really good information. I was really interested in how coordination can really help everybody. I think that was the big part of what we learned today, and I hope we can act on that. And thank you all for coming, and thank the township for having us.
Thank you.